All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Harry with Church of the Eternal Logos. And today we have a very fun and interesting stream. We'll be diving into some of the history of Chinese philosophy, most specifically concerning Confucius and his system of Confucianism. And a major shout out has to go out to Brendan, who's in the chat. Shout out to Brendan for sponsoring today's stream. This was a great topic. And Brendan asked if I could talk a little bit about Confucianism as it relates to Orthodox Christianity, or at least from an Orthodox Christian perspective. And so there's so much when I was preparing for this stream, and it took me a little bit more time, partly as my own interest in just diving into, different tidbits in different areas. But it was like so much to cover, right? Do I dive into the Analects? Do I dive into the sayings of Confucius? Do I dive into some of the important books and the 5 classics? So I put together a document, and I'll be sending this to Brendan once the stream's over, either tonight or tomorrow, which is 15 pages. So it's a little long. My goal is to try to keep these show notes, or I guess if you want to call them show notes, topic notes. It's more than just the show notes per se. Somewhere in the ballpark of 10 pages, but this one was 15. It was 17, so I actually cut some out of it because I don't want to be overly, I don't want to present too much, like sort of maybe less important specific information about various things. So in this, I have an overview of the key concepts and beliefs, which we're going to be talking about. The 5 constants. These are the core features of Confucianism. I'll just say a few of them right now. Ren is benevolence, humaneness, compassion. This is really the central virtue of Confucianism. But then you have Li, which is ritual propriety. And we're going to be talking about how Confucianism, is it a religion or is it a philosophy? This is kind of the perennial debate in religious studies scholars. So I taught an intro class to world religions at the University of Urbana-Champaign, University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. And this is always the perennial debate. Is Confucianism a religion or is it a philosophy? And I'm going to post towards the end of today's stream, I'm actually going to post a poll, as I know the chat's been enjoying as of late, and see what you guys think. I can see why, when you take an intro to world religions class and you look at China, why you're introduced to Taoism and Confucianism as sort of religious orientations. As we dive deeper into Confucianism, it's not going to be a sort of theistic paradigm. Now, there's going to be a lot of similarities, and we're going to be talking about logos spermaticos that we can kind of see inkling seeds of orthodoxy, or at least orthodox teachings within some of the Confucius philosophy. But I kind of lead more towards a totalizing or ultimate moral philosophy. And if you want to consider that religious due to the filial piety and the emphasis, as I just highlighted, of the second 5 constant, Li, which is ritual propriety, they do a lot of rituals, and ritual has a very important social function and ethical function within Confucianism and Confucian philosophy. But is it religious, since there's not actually a creator God or really a transcendent deity per se? Now, as I've noted, as I put in my notes, Neo-Confucianism has been sort of intermingling with Taoism and Buddhism, and has adopted maybe concepts of immortality, reincarnation, maybe what we would understand as more Western thoughts of the soul or the self. But Confucianism doesn't really get into this understanding of like static essences, right? This is really a worldview that is entirely focused on the sort of dynamic processes of relationality. And this is why many people consider it a social or a moral and social philosophy. But when we look at these core virtues, we see Ren, benevolence, the number 1. It's all about ethical and moral development when we're talking about Confucianism. 2, ritual propriety. So adherence to rituals, customs, societal norms. This is a huge function in which how there is a sort of collective effervescence of the society and how they orient themselves as one body, one unity oriented in the same sort of ethical and moral direction. Then you have Yi, righteousness, acting according to moral principles, Zhi, wisdom, knowledge applied regarding ethical insight, and Shin, integrity, faithfulness, and honesty. And these kind of five constants, these are basically the core features of Confucian philosophy. So we're going to introduce some of those things to you guys. Look a little bit, just mention some of the text. So I decided to omit any focus specifically on texts. I have a little bit where we talk a little bit about things regarding, I just have a few quotes from the Analects of Confucius, which is the collection of his sayings. But I figured that's really less important. And based on what Brendan sent me regarding his email, he had like 4 specific questions he wanted me to kind of tackle. And they all had to do with essentially looking at Confucian doctrines or Confucian ideas in light of orthodoxy. And so I kind of just made that the primary focus of building the show notes that I'll introduce to you guys here in just a few. So, smash that like. This is going to be, I think, a lot of fun. The way that we're going to do it is I got a few of my opening points here to really lay out the paradigm, right? So when introducing a new topic, and I'm assuming some of you guys may not actually be really familiar with Confucianism. And so when you dive into these topics, I take into mind, okay, what if somebody's watching who doesn't know the spring and autumn period during the Eastern Zhou dynasty? You know, if I just start introducing these things without really giving context, it kind of goes out the window. So when we're looking at the timeline for today's discussion, at least for Confucius, this is a nice little timeline that I found. Maybe not the most aesthetically pleasing, but I think most Westerners, we have no idea. If you ask somebody about, which one's your favorite Chinese dynasty, imperial dynasty, people will be like, oh, what? So, and to answer that question, my personal favorite's the Tang Dynasty. This is the Tang Dynasty's down here. I'm a big fan of the Tang Dynasty, but there's a lot of great dynasties. Confucius, Lao Tzu, they are arriving in this period right here called the Spring and Autumn period. We have Confucius circa this period here, Warring States period. And this is what's called, in regards to the dynastic dimensions, the Eastern Zhou period, which is 771 BC to 256 BC. So when we're looking at our timeline here, this is well predating Christ. Confucius himself, it's generally believed 551 to 479 BC. Okay, so we're talking about Socrates and Plato and that type of time frame here concerning Confucius. And so it's during this Eastern Zhou period in which Confucius is he's living at a time, and I kind of have a map during this period right here. He's living in Lu. You see this right here in Khufu. This is where Confucius is, and he kind of grows up in a middle-class family. Interesting little side note is that it's now believed that his dad was like 60 years old. Already had basically multiple daughters of a previous wife, and remarried a young girl who was in her teens at the time. And this was, it was, I guess you should say, Confucius's mother. And so Confucius's father actually passes away by the age of 3. I was reading and looking at some documentaries. Some scholars believe that this was a great influence on his doctrine concerning filial piety and this sort of reverence, this hierarchical respect and honor-driven relationship to family members, which you take the family unit in Confucianism and then you expand that to the empire or the state. And that's the whole thing that's going on here, is that it's trying to develop personal empathy so that you can, we're going to talk a little bit about the paradigm here, but you can kind of fulfill your relational duty depending on where you're at. And so there's, again, multiple relationships. I'm going to bring this up again, but this sort of relational ethics, that there's 5 relationships Confucius talks about a lot: father son, ruler to subject, husband and wife, older and younger brothers, or really that you can translate that to sort of elders versus younger people within a society, and then friend to friend. He highlights that these 5 relationships we need to cultivate and understand the dynamic and fulfill our role in those, so that we can create a sort of societal totalizing moral ethic which creates harmony and balance. Because the whole point in Confucianism of this pursuit and this cultivation of personal morality and ethical behavior is that it creates societal harmony and balance, which is sort of a reflection. And really, it's the point. Again, they don't have a creation and a creatio ex nihilo. For them, their paradigm is cyclical, that creation is eternal. There is no beginning and end to this. And this is one of the reasons why there's essentially no eschatology in Confucianism. Um, Zord says Confucianism leaked from Wuhan. Not quite, but that is a little funny comment. So thank you, Zorst. Um, but anyways, it doesn't have the same paradigm as we approach. And this is why actually a book that Brendan sent me in the notes, it's called Thinking Through Confucius. And this is a very popular book. I actually don't own it. It's been referenced to me multiple times. I actually should get it. But here, let me actually bring that over so you guys can see what I'm talking about here. This is the book right here. It's called Thinking Through Confucius, and this is by David Hall and Roger Ames. And Brendan was kind enough to kind of send me the opening introduction there that kind of lays out the project. And what they're trying to do is put Confucianism as a philosophical system really in its own language. Because one of the problems and why the perennial debate between Confucianism being a moral philosophy or an ethical philosophical system or a religion has to do that it doesn't really fit in the linguistic categories that we have created within the Western, or really I would say the larger Christian paradigm coming out of Greek philosophy mixed with, the Hebraic Israelite tradition of the Old Testament. Is when we then transpose these linguistic categories onto Confucianism, there seems to it doesn't totally jive well. And so this book here is essentially them trying to put it in conversation with basically the Western philosophical tradition and highlight that if you're going to talk about Confucianism in regards to Western philosophy, at least from what Brendan sent me, it's more akin to something like a sort of mixture of pragmatism and process philosophy. And it has to do because there is no static essences. They don't have these same philosophical categories coming out of Greek philosophy, these Platonic ideals and Aristotelianism. So for them, everything is in a dynamic flow. And you can understand this from yin and yang. Much, obviously we associate that with Taoism, but yin is becoming yang, yang is becoming yin. And so what is happening is a dynamic process of becoming that's ever going. And for them, it's cyclical. It never ends. There is no beginning or end. So this book, if you guys are interested or you want to read more, this is a very academic, philosophically oriented text of 2 gentlemen trying to put Confucianism into its own terms through the lens of sort of the Western philosophical tradition. So just want to throw that out there. But Confucius, getting back to him, he was born here in Khufu, and he became, again, there's all these legends about him as a child. We don't know how accurate some of this stuff is because much of it was written later, but he did have, and we'll describe this, especially when we get into the documentary on Confucius. I found one documentary that is not copyrighted that we'd be able to watch today. And it's actually an old BBC documentary, and it was quite good. But Confucius, they claim at a young age that he was sort of already enamored with ritual, and that while other kids were out playing games and doing various things, Confucius was performing like the ancient Zhou rituals. And he viewed the Zhou dynasty as a period of a stable sort of ideal, harmonious framework that he wanted to implement in his own time because during that warring period, all these different states were warring against other, and specifically regarded this Lu state, this Lu province over here, the Qi, they wanted to dominate them. And that was, and most of these states and provinces were battling each other and sort of vying for supremacy in the capital there over in Zhou. So eventually Confucius, as I think in his early 20s, makes his way over to Zhou, and he learns the ancient rituals, the ancestral rituals and rites related to the Zhou dynasty. And his idea was that there's a continual flow of becoming, right? And ethical and moral behavior is indicative of the moral authority of heaven. Again, not it's kind of more abstract. There's not like a God in heaven within Confucianism. Tien is a concept that's more like the realm. It's sort of an abstract understanding. There is no personified God within Confucianism. It's not, and it's not theocentric like our Orthodox paradigm is. I'll mention all this stuff more as we go along here, but think of it as there's a ever-flowing energy that is spanning from the past to the present and to the future. And Confucius understands the participation in ritual through the right moral and ethical intention of the individual aligns them with this sort of energetic harmony. And so this is why he wanted to learn these rituals. And eventually he goes back, he gets promoted to part of the government there in Lu. Actually, he's very, very meritocratic. So Confucius is very much interested. Some of the reforms he made in Lu during his period was, look, if your job is X, Y, Z, well, then what skills do you have that qualify you for this? Because, and this is going to get into the Gaokao. This is the qualification exam. If you guys are familiar with Chinese society, you know that when they go to college, you have to take an exam, and it basically tells you regarding their rubric and metrics, how smart you are, what fields of study you can pursue, and what universities you can go to. And some universities then, based on your Gaokao score, will say, well, you can't really choose this subject. You didn't really qualify, so you can do this over here. And when I was in China, actually, though, I was at so there was a school, university has like disciplines or smaller schools within schools. I was in the learning Chinese as a second language. And so it was almost all women. There was a couple guys in it regarding the teachers, the Chinese students at Zhongshan Dashui, Sun Yat-sen University in Guangzhou. And I asked one of the guys and the girl that was with, I was like, why did you guys choose teaching Chinese as a second language? And they told me it's the only thing it was like this or another topic. I only had like basically 2 subjects the school allowed me to choose from. And I thought if I choose this one, at least I'd get to interact with foreign people. And so this understanding of taking an exam and qualifying for opportunities within society, this is rooted within Confucianism. Now, the Confucius, the exam that you would take after Confucius, really after the Han dynasty, once Wu of Han really sort of reorients the Chinese culture towards a Confucian understanding, that this exam, I think it's called the Kuji. I forget. I'm blanking on the Chinese name of the exam. But anyways, you had to memorize like 1,000 different lines of the Analects in various books, these Confucius texts, these 5 classics. And you would then be scored based on how well you did on that exam. And then if you were in the 1 to 2% of memorizing, I mean, it took like weeks, months, potentially years for these students to study for this exam. And it took 3 days. It was a 3-day long exam. And they were there basically all day for 3 days. And then they'd go wherever they went to, sleep. Then they'd come back and continue the exam. That the top 1 to 2% were allowed to work in the government. And this idea of creating a qualifying exam gets back to Confucius when he comes back to Lu after learning all these rights. He wants to establish a meritocratic society that is governed and oriented around moral and ethical behavior in relationship to these ancient rituals regarding filial piety and honor and respect for our ancestors, and sort of unifying through ethical behavior and ritual this conduit between this world and heaven, right? And you have to understand that in Chinese culture, Zhongguo, which is the Chinese word for China, they believe they're the center of the earth. It's Middle Earth. They are the center of the world. And so when you're looking at Chinese philosophy, you have to remember that they believe that to be the case. They are the center of the world. And so, anyways, Confucius implemented these meritocratic reforms within Lu, and they were very prosperous, right? If you were strong, you were given a job that required strength. If you were, whatever your skill set is, whatever you qualified for based on your abilities, you would then be given a job in relationship to that skill set. And so eventually Confucius decides that he wants to start traveling. He wants to get another emperor to actually enact his worldview, his values, this system, this philosophy. And so he travels all through these different states and eventually winds up back at Lu after basically nobody wanted to adopt his worldview. And so so what was he going to do? He devoted his life to this understanding, this cultivation of Confucius teachings. And we're going to get into, so it's not going to be so abstract or some historical narrative here. I promise you guys, there's going to be more meat on the bone as we go through the stream here. But he gets back and no emperor. The whole point is creating the ideal government, the ideal society, the ideal imperial rule. And nobody wanted to adopt Confucius's rules. So he goes back, and what does he do? He begins to acquire large followings of young men that wanted to attain this right here, Junzi. Junzi is the son, or it's the Chinese philosophical term translated as gentleman, superior person, a nobleman. And it has to do with, again, this personal cultivation of moral and ethics. Let's see what Wiki says here. Since the characters are overtly gendered, the term is frequently translated as gentleman. Gentry as distinguished / moral person are common gender neutral translation. Junzi is implied to the classic of changes, and I Ching attributed traditionally to the Duke Wen of Zhou, and by Confucius in his works to describe the ideal human being. And so what Confucius does is he starts telling these young men, look, whatever you're going to go into, and many of his followers began to get positions within the government, but the whole goal was for them to cultivate and become a junzi, a gentleman, a superior moral person. And by doing that and then enacting those values through their governmental system, they could realign, they could bring social coherence, balance, and harmony back into place. So that just gives you a bit of an understanding of what it is Confucius is trying to do here. And I'm going to bring, and I got more to speak about the specifics of the teachings and what they're trying to do. But let me just give you a sort of quick paradigmatic overview and how it relates to orthodoxy. So my first thing here is looking at like the positives of Confucianism. So where does Confucianism and maybe orthodoxy actually align itself in the same general disposition towards an ultimate goal? And I would say the first one is clearly, and I've already been yammering on about moral virtue, is the cultivation of moral virtue. So for Confucianism, self-discipline, education, rituals, becoming the junzi, this is the ultimate goal. And so unlike our Orthodox paradigm, where maybe formal education isn't the way in which one becomes a superior person regarding the process of theosis, but for Confucius, instilling self-discipline, controlling oneself, controlling the way that you act, being able to recognize the hierarchy of being here all the way up to the emperor and seeing where you fit in and then contributing to the maximum degree, that is the goal here. And if every citizen in the community, in the state, in the empire is doing this, well, you could see why the logical follow is that you would have an incredibly harmonious and balanced society of people like being driven to enact personal virtue towards each other. And so you that self-discipline and then the education, becoming more informed, becoming and I'm going to show you guys, actually I'll show you right here, is one of the, what is it? Uh, Here it is. The Di Ziguai. This is was written under the Qing dynasty during the reign of Kangxi emperor. So again, here's another interesting thing is that I'll tell you guys more about them, but the two emperors that ruled the longest within Chinese history are two of the most Confucius like emperors. So they were the biggest supporters of Confucianism, which Confucianism believed that natural disasters, earthquakes, major floods, the invasions of various armies that are threatening the whatever dynasty is in rule at the time. This has to do with a disbalanced and disharmonious moral order within society. And so the two emperors that actually served the longest, which in a Confucian mindset would indicate that these emperors were enacting and actually living out this moral virtue, because by doing so, they've created stability and harmony, is the Emperor Wu of Han and then Kangxi, emperor during the Qing dynasty. And so the Kangxi, he reigned for 61 years. 61 years he was emperor of China. And then Emperor Wu, what was his? I can't remember. I want to say it was like 50. Oh, there it is. Yep, 54 years. And a record not broken until the reign of Kangxi. So it's really interesting. And I have a point within the notes here that I'll present to you guys, talking about why they're held in such high regard regarding Confucian ethics and moral teachings. But another point about Confucianism is this emphasis on relational ethics. So I will highlight that in regards to their paradigm, relational ethics, it's a little bit different than the way that we as Orthodox Christians would understand morals and ethics, abiding by a revealed divine law that aids in the soul attaining a personal relationship with the transcendent God, creator God. Because again, remember this transcendent thing in the book, Thinking Through Confucius. I mean, he's trying to highlight how you can talk about transcendence outside of a Western context and more into this Confucius context. But relational ethics is the basis for their ethical system. It's all about how you relate to other people and how you enact these timeless virtues so that you create stability. So if you're acting morally, you will create stability between you and your father. And if your father's acting morally, they'll create stability with you. And so I said these 5 relationships are central: father and son, ruler and subject, husband and wife, older and younger brother, or elder and younger, and then friend and friend. Within all these relationships, each person has to recognize where they're at on this relational hierarchy and then fulfill their role. So the wife has to recognize that the husband is, in our language, the head, right? The woman's the body, the man is the head. They don't have that same Orthodox Christian rhetoric, but the man is the head of the family. We can certainly put that point there. And so she needs to submit to him just as he submits to the rule of the emperor, right? And so the family unit within Confucianism, as I said, is a pattern for society itself. And so another point of emphasis within Confucianism is this harmony and order. I mean, we worship the Logos. The incarnate Logos is Jesus Christ. And so understanding, creating personal harmony, both within ourselves in relationship to God, but also with each other and a sort of the communal body of Christ and the church and the parish, and establishing order against chaos, right? And I don't mean to sound like Jordan Peterson here, order and chaos. But harmony and order is the central thrust here of Confucianism. That harmony comes through, again, this ethical behavior and proper governance related to the mandate of heaven. And so I should have mentioned this regarding, again, the emperors and their reigns within Chinese historical periods, is that the mandate of heaven, this is this heavenly abstract realm, which is the authoritative source of harmony and order, that if you are not ethically and morally abiding by these codes, your emperor, your country will be destroyed. And in a sense, we as Orthodox Christians understand this, because every emperor, every king is ordained to be in that position by the will of God, even if they're a terrible person, because a terrible ruler is indicative of the sins of the people. I mean, we just had Joe Biden here in America. I don't mean to make a sort of joke about it, but you get my point here. And so this concept of, again, they don't have a theocentric or an anthropocentric God. They have a general abstract understanding of this divine sort of harmony and balance within Tien, heaven. But this mandate of heaven is central to understanding how these Confucius ethics and moral principles relate and why they should be applied by the emperor himself. This Confucianism is not a system that is just abstract for individuals, to do their own thing in society. This is a system for total coherence, total balance and harmony, all the way up to the emperor himself, who must abide by these principles. And if he does not, the mandate of heaven will be broken and he will no longer be emperor, because something is going to happen. So that's an interesting point that I think, again, within our paradigm, we can actually relate to an objective moral standard. Now, Confucianism is totally operating on an objective moral standard. Now, if you're going to do, argue apologetics and try to say, well, if you're going to precept the Confucian on their relational ethical paradigm and their moral authority, ultimately it is socially constructed to some degree, because authority is really found within tradition itself. And I'm going to explain a little bit more about that here in a few. But Tien, heaven, is and acts as a sort of, again, based on that thinking through Confucius. I want to be careful using transcendent, because transcendent is not something that we understand as Orthodox Christians, where we have a transcendent deity, a deity that has a one essence, three persons, right? It's a static essence, a static nature. The Confucius paradigm doesn't have those concepts, those categories. You as a self is a becoming, it's always changing. You're not the same person now as you were 2 hours ago. That they have this mentality of a sort of cyclical dynamic worldview. But heaven does sort of act as a sort of transcendent guiding authority for human society towards harmony and righteousness. And so with that general framework, again, not the same as our paradigm, but we can understand something very similar as Orthodox Christians, that there is a moral authority for them. It's heaven related to tradition itself, because their understanding is not revealed, right? So like I mentioned, Confucianism is not a revealed tradition. So it's a tradition built on the pragmatic efficaciousness of times that were, and we need to return back to those specific moral codes, and we need to elucidate them within the contemporary period. And that's what Confucianism is since Confucius. When we look at, whether it be Xunzi or Mencius, these are individuals that are articulating Confucius doctrines and principles, which for even Confucius, say sort of predate me. I'm just putting them together. I'm articulating them as they could be understood at the time in which I live. And so then Confucius scholars or philosophers afterwards, that's what they were doing. They were articulating these moral and ethical principles as they relate to the particular time and place and the context in which they're from. And then the last one I want to highlight is the communal emphasis, that Confucianism is totally focused on the community and not the individual. And really, this is one of the differences that it has with Taoism. You can make a strong case that Taoism is much more individualistic than Confucianism. Confucianism, yes, you as an individual have to enact your ethical moral code and your relationship, your relational ethics towards other people, but the whole point is the society. The whole point is the community. The whole point is the country, the state, the nation. And so individuals have a duty to fulfill their roles and bring continuity with the ancestors and heaven into the immediacy of the here and now. That's the role of the individual. But why do you do that? You do that for the collective. You're not doing it to align yourself with Jesus Christ. You're not doing it to attain supernatural abilities. You're not doing it to ensure your place into an eternal kingdom. You're doing it because that is the opportunity for you to establish harmony with what has been, with the now, and what will be. And that is the ultimate goal here, is creating this sort of timeless harmony and balance. And so, overview of the paradigm here, and I'm going to try to wrap this up quick so we can move into more stuff that I want to chat with you guys about. But ultimate overview of the paradigm, Confucius paradigm. Number one, no creator God. Okay, so if when you're analyzing a paradigm, I think that's a big one. Do you have a kratio ex nihilo? Is the creation, is the universe, is the material world itself, does it have a beginning point? Confucianism says no. There is no beginning point. There is no creator God. There is no creating entity. Heaven is the ultimate source of moral order. But again, heaven isn't really defined. Confucius has a funny thing. I'm going to butcher it, but I'm going to paraphrase it. And essentially, he doesn't talk much about the afterlife. And he said something as like to the effect is, we don't even know how to live correctly. What are we going to know about what happens after we die? And so Confucius was very focused on, how do we figure out the problem of living correctly in this life? That's the question that he wants to answer. That's the problem at hand. He's not interested in eschatology. He's not interested in speculation about the afterlife. He's not interested in what we would consider deity or theistic understanding of God. And one of the things that I do think is interesting, because I've heard people refer to modern veneration of Confucius as a semi-god. And I forget what, I was watching a documentary of a scholar talking about Confucianism, and they made this claim that he's sort of a semi-god. And the way you can kind of get to that point is within Chinese, Shen or Shenqi, which is sort of the term for deity, doesn't mean a transcendent God in the sense that we think of the Holy Trinity. It really, if you're going to have like a literal translation, it's like something that is exerting a past influence onto the present moment. And that's what the ancestors are. So are the ancestors gods? No. Are the ancestors immortal? Well, it depends on what period in Confucianism you ask that question. But the ancestors are present with us because the ancestors are still exerting a past influence onto the present moment. And from that definition, you could get the word Shenqi, which is like deity. But they're not, in our understanding of a God, they're not omniscient, they're not omnipresent, they're not omnipowerful or anything like this. Okay. So no creator God. Ritual, Li, is an intentional expression of reverence for cosmic balance. That is the goal. When you participate in these mass rituals that Confucians would participate in, or even a localized one, could be at your home with your family, could be before the Chinese New Year, and you have maybe you set out food offering, maybe you set out some incense, and you burn incense to your ancestors. You offer in very nice, aesthetically pleasing bowls. You put out the meal that your family's going to eat, and you put it out for the ancestors so that they can enjoy it too. You do this with the intention and the intentional expression of a sort of reverence for the cosmic balance. The reason why they were, if you want to use the term worship or ritualistically worship their ancestors, is about establishing this cosmic balance, this breakdown in the time frame, the time, the continuum of time itself. That's what these rituals, it's like, it really is a sort of creation of sacred time. But the point is for the cultivation of personal, moral, ethical behavior. And so Tien, heaven, this concept, as I highlighted, it is not associated with miracles. So in the Confucian paradigm, they're not so much interested in miracles. They're interested in ethical behavior, personal education, and performing your ritual function within society. And your ritual function may be a street sweeper, right? That may be the skill. And so Confucius has all, and I have a video, we're going to watch some sayings of Confucius. Confucius says, well, no matter what your job is, never do it mindlessly. Always do it with the full intention of being the best you can at everything you do. Again, you can see why this would be such a powerful ideology for an entire society. Because if everybody was on that same mind frame and everybody, no matter what their job was legitimately thinking, it is my ethical duty and responsibility to be the most moral person and the most efficacious and skilled at whatever my job is in society, you would have a highly functioning society. And so this is one of the reasons why Confucianism never goes away out of Chinese society. And even today, after the Cultural Revolution of Mao, where they try to basically get rid of all this stuff, do away with all the history of China and all this different stuff. Well, it's now back with the full force. So Confucianism is now taught to children within primary school in China. So they're reading the classics. They're learning the Analects. They're learning the sayings of Confucius. And that's exactly why I brought this up right here. This Guai. This is one of the books in which and I watched something on a specific town. I forget which one. It was a city within China where they have an audio reading of this book, which is for children and teaching Confucianism to them. And they play it through the speakers throughout the city, like every day. And so what's it talk about? At home, be dutiful to my parents. It's talking about, when your parents are mournful, mourn with them. When your parents ask you to do something, do it as quickly as possible. When your parents, punish you, do it with an understanding that you transgress certain boundaries. Be dutiful to my parents. Standards for younger brothers and juniors when away from home, understanding your role. If I am the older sibling, I will befriend my younger ones. If I am the younger sibling, I will respect the older ones. And most certainly never forget their birthdays for all time. Punishment for not respecting the older siblings is to wear all black for 3 years as penance. This is the type of stuff that's in here. Be cautious or reverent in my daily life. I will get up each morning as the sun rises. At night, I shall sleep late. Or in the morning, I will get up early. At night, I will sleep. When I realize what time is passing me by and cannot be turned back, and that I am getting older year by year, I will especially treasure my present moment. In the morning, one must wash the hands plus rinse the mouth. After returning from urinating and defecation, one always cleans their hands. It's this type of stuff. Be trustworthy. Love all equally. Human beings, regardless of nationality, race, or religion, and everyone should be loved equally. We are all sheltered by the same sky, and we all live on the same planet Earth. Be close and learn from people of virtue and compassion. This is specifically something that Confucius mentions. And then after above all are accomplished, I should study further and learn literature and art to improve my cultural and spiritual life. Or if I have energy left over, I should study writings. So this is something that they teach children. It's kind of shocking with the degradation of the Western world in our society to see the extent in which they're actually trying to cultivate real values within their children. And this particular book, again, was done during the reign of Kangxi, and that was 1661 to 1722. By Li Yushu, and the book is based on the ancient teaching of the Chinese philosopher Confucius. So you get my point there. Now, next paradigm. First one, no creator God. Second one, ancestral veneration. How do we understand this? Ancestral veneration is about respect and honor of the it as the most sacred duty of the individual within a Confucian paradigm. They influence the ancestors' moral and social harmony of the family. So, one, it's ethically and morally right for you to perform these ancestral rituals, right? Offering food and incense. And so, if you've been to China, you know that ancestral veneration is still, very, very common. And when you go to a gravesite, if you go to the grave or a the tomb of an emperor or something, you'll see money scattered all over the place because they're giving money to them, even though it's not useful, they're dead. But the idea is you offer something of value so that they can bless you in return. And so this same thing is understood regarding your personal ancestors, your personal grandparents and great grandparents and great 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 grandparents, is that you are honoring them, you're honoring the sacrifices and the suffering that they had to deal with to actually offer you the opportunity to be here in the present moment. And so if you're failing on your ritual duty of filial piety, yeah, they can then cause, and really you're already causing it, right? You're already in a sort of moral imbalance, but they can also affect and influence the social harmony of your particular family. And so, as I said, ancestors are not divine. These are not divine. These are not angels. They have no supernatural power. They are not omnipotent or omniscient. And the way that I wrote it is I almost understand the ancestral worship and Confucianism, not exactly the same, but similar to the ways in which we venerate saints, that they function similar to saints. They have no independent divine power. Now, saints, we would understand, we do believe in miracles, and we would say, yeah, certain saints actually had gifts and miracles related to their life, their missions, their relics after their death, that type of thing. But all of that is relationship to them fulfilling God's will and those uncreated energies fulfilling them and allowing them to be a vessel for God within space and time. And so maybe to that degree, the ancestral veneration is not looking at ancestors as divine saints, but the way that we recognize saints within the Orthodox Church is a sort of recognition of our spiritual ancestors and a recognition that they're not gone, a recognition that what they did at that point within their life has a butterfly effect to us right now, and that they are somebody that we can learn from. And in that regards, I would say ancestral veneration within Confucianism has similarities with our sort of understanding of saints. Next point is the afterlife. In the Confucian paradigm, how do they understand the afterlife? You keep talking about ancestors. Are they immortal? Do they have to do something to attain a sort of eternal status or an immortal status to be an ancestor that's venerated for long periods? And as I said, at least if you're looking at the original teachings of Confucius, there's not much on this. Not much on this. Now, Neo-Confucianism, as it began to be integrated with Taoism and Buddhism, it talks a little bit more about immortality or reincarnation or the idea of a sort of um, non-temporal self, a self that isn't just defined based on here, a self that exists like a soul, basically. Okay, to use the idea of a soul. But Confucius, as I said, was antagonistic towards any discussion of the afterlife because his problem that he wanted to solve was the here and now. And so he advocated for a pragmatic, ethical living over any form of eschatology or discussions about what happens after we die. He would say, you don't know that for sure, but we can try to figure out the best way to live right here, right now, and orient ourselves in relationship to that cosmic harmony. And so ancestors live on through descendants, according to Confucius. So some of the earlier teachings, we venerate ritualistically these ancestors, but then the question comes, are the ancestors still living? And it was hard for me to get a definitive question on because I didn't go through the analects and all this different stuff. I didn't use primary sources for today's stream. Sorry, guys. But what I found is that basically Confucianism, before Neo-Confucianism, where it's kind of a little bit more modernized with terms that we would recognize, they would say you honor the ancestors as if they are present. But the point isn't to focus on them as and an internal entity that can help you out in the right here, right now. It's about creating this relational collapse of time, right? It's about understanding relationality. And this is one of the interesting things regarding this idea is that the Kong family. So um, if you look at Confucius right here, you'll see Kongqiu. That's his name. Kong meaning the surname. In Chinese, usually the surname's first. The Kong family has been able to trace itself back to Confucius, so we know that he was a real historical person, and they have the largest known trackable, traceable ancestry in the world. It goes back. There's like a Chinese newscaster I saw in one documentary. Um, it looked like maybe in the West Coast, maybe the San Francisco area, California, maybe. I'm not sure. I forget her name, but she was like a 77th descendant of Confucius. And all these people are tracked in a book, and they have a literal house devoted towards their ancestry where they trace and track everybody. And so even within China, like they are very proud about having an ancestral connection back to Confucius. But you see, the reason why there's such an impetus on creating that ancestral energy and that ancestral legacy and lineage, that's the word I'm looking for. The lineage is because of this understanding of honoring your ancestors, recognizing where it is that you're coming from, and recognizing that they are, in a sense, living through you, that you are the product of your ancestors. And so I thought it was fascinating that the oldest known traced family line is Confucius's family line. That's pretty cool. The oldest one known in the world. Very cool. Um, Chinese Mormons. Oh man. You guys are hilarious. Anyway, shout out to you guys. I'm going to read some super chats in just a second. Let me finish up these paradigms real quick, and then I want to. If you guys have any questions, please, if guys support my work for these streams and these sponsor streams. Major thank you again goes out to Brendan. Hope he's still with us in the chat. If you have any questions or comments, or you want to support what I'm doing, please send in a super chat. And also, guys, I have just posted an almost 3-hour video on eschatological prophecies from saints and elders for members only. So it's the part 2 of my stream on World War II, Armageddon, all that different stuff. I just posted the part 2 on YouTube for members. So give some memberships, get your membership. You guys can then go watch that, and I'll be putting more membership material on the YouTube channel. So just FYI, if you weren't aware. Anyways, okay, back to the topic, afterlife. So as I said, last point I said is Neo-Confucianism already integrated all this different stuff, such as immortality, reincarnation, and spirits. Okay, moving forward. Polar metaphysics. So if we're going to understand the paradigm of Confucianism, we have to understand what is their metaphysical paradigm. As I said, it's a polar metaphysics. Their metaphysics is totally focused on this dynamic process of being and looking at how it relates to the relationality of society and relationships, individual relationships. So there is no static. Their metaphysics, they have no static concept of being. There is no essence. There is no Aristotelian substance. That's not part of their paradigm. There is no fixed essences to things. It's a cyclical worldview. It's a worldview that has no beginning and end. And this is why it's all about the relationality of becoming. Because when we look at the yin and yang, yin is becoming yang, yang is becoming yin. This is history. These are relationships, right? So just as when we're looking at those 5 crucial relationships, father and son, as one, essentially your father dies, you then fulfill that fatherly role, and now it's towards your son. You see that everything is becoming. These relationships are becoming. The older and younger brother relationship eventually becomes the older brother. The younger brother becomes the older brother. Maybe, again, there's other younger people within the family. You see this dynamic of how even the relationships, the 5 relationships, they're moving, they're interchanging. There's a dynamic process at lay there. And so it's a constant state of flux and transformation. Their metaphysics is very Heraclitean in that sense. You never step in the same river twice, Heraclitus. Confucius is of that same mindset. It's that same sort of metaphysical worldview. And so proper ethical behavior within their metaphysics, it's proper individual ethical behavior that creates societal harmony and order. And so the next point, so paradigm, metaphysics, ethics, epistemology. Their ethics is a relational ethics. I've already mentioned this. Everything is about relational complementarity. Fulfill your special and ethical responsibility. Fill your social and ethical responsibilities. And then their epistemology. What is their epistemology? This was something that I really had to sit and think about because it's not really explicated. It's not like a Western philosophical system where it's very explicit. What is the epistemology of Confucianism? I described it as a pragmatic virtue epistemology. And the way I described it is knowledge. So how do you come to know something in Confucianism? Knowledge is practical and deeply tied to a moral self-cultivation. And so knowledge then is not abstract. Knowledge is not, again, they don't have essences. So this is where Greek philosophy was incredible because it was dealing with abstract knowledge. It was providing the basis for how we come to know abstract things. Confucianism is not interested in that. Confucianism is socially constructed epistemology as it arises from tradition, rituals, understandings of teachings and principles of Confucius. And so knowledge in general is gained through personal experience, practice and repetition, ritual, collective effervescence, the ecstatic, I don't want to call it a spiritual experience, but ritual has a sort of sacred time. That's what I'll say. Through sacred time of ritual and personal reflection. That's how one gains knowledge in Confucianism. How do you come to know the world in Confucianism? It's through personal experience, it's through practice, it's through ritual, and it's through self-reflection. And this is what allows you to become a sort of wise and prudent moral figure, is through these methods, what I would call their methods of epistemology there. And so I have a couple questions here that Brendan asked me in the email that I just want to address before we go any further. Yes, it sounds like they are trying to create an obedient society. Yes, they are. I mean, that is the point of Confucianism, is to create an obedient society that is driven by the same sort of moral and ethical behavior, and that is united through ritual. That is exactly what it is. So, yeah, you're picking up what I'm putting down, Maria, 28. So you got it. You got it. It sounds like theosis. It's not, though, because the paradigm, there is no personal God. There is no theocentric world paradigm. There are no static metaphysics. So even when you're talking about theosis is moving from creation into something that is like we were trying to attain the likeness of something that's uncreated, the second person, right? We're trying to become like Jesus Christ. Well, they don't even have the categories of essence. So like regarding theosis, like energy, yes, they don't even have that category. So once you recognize that, so it's not theosis, but to get at your point, Hezron, it kind of is, in the sense that moral cultivation and the elevation of and becoming the junzi, right? The gentleman, the superior person. It's through enacting out these virtues and morals to other people. And in that degree, yes, we as Orthodox Christians are trying to take these uncreated energies of God and then enact them out into the world to other people. And Confucius would say, yes, hell yes. That's exactly what we got to do, because as you act morally towards your neighbor and towards your emperor and towards your boss, and understand your place and function in society, and that it's not about you, it's not about individualism, it's all about collectivism, he would say, yeah, that's the point. And if you apply that to your life and do that diligently every day, you'll become a more ethical and moral person in that process. So is it theosis? Not exactly, but something aching. So I do appreciate that. A few key points in regards to question. Actually, you know what? I'll address these after the super chat. So let's read some super chats. Shout out to Nana Flower Power, became a COTEL crew member. Shout out to you, Nana. Again, my latest members video is up on YouTube. So if you guys have a YouTube membership, go check it out. You'll get full access. If anybody in the chat's feeling generous, please give some COTEL crew membership so more people can watch the members videos. I got two full streams basically over there, and one I just uploaded today. So thank you very much, Nana. Thank you very much, Matt Scroggins, for also becoming a COTEL crew member. Shout out to Josh Betts, throws in $2, says the Holy Spirit is at St. Innocent, Redford, Michigan. Glory to God. So thank you so much, Josh, for the support. Eric Z throws in $5, says thanks for the videos. Your streams with Father Turbo were all-time greats. Well, thank you very much, Eric. I need to sign up. I need to reach out to Father Turbo. Father Turbo's so busy. He has like a schedule. Last time I tried to schedule a stream with him, he was booked out for like 2.5 months. Literally not a single day for even an hour to 2 hour opening was available on his schedule. That's how busy that man is. So shout out to Father Turbo. Love you, Father. God bless you and your family. Hope you guys are doing well. And I need to reach out to him and see if maybe we could set something up in the near future. It's been a while. So thank you very much, Eric Z. Do appreciate that. Emperor Sheev throws in $2.79 and says Confucianism sounds more moral than Islam. You know, to some degrees it is. So to some degrees, I would agree with you, Emperor Sheev. Confucianism, and that's where one of the next point I'm going to answer the question from Brendan in the email regarding Logos Spermaticos. And he's asking whether Confucians are primed for orthodoxy, and in some degrees they are. In regards to some of the theistic claims, again, I'll speak more about that in just a moment. But yeah, Confucianism is actually, you know, when you think about the system that Confucius was putting together, and we're going to listen to some of Confucius's quotes here in just a second. They're timeless. This is still good wisdom. Almost everything that I show you today in regards to quotes from Confucius coming from the Analects, this is actually applicable to an Orthodox Christian because it's not asking you to devote yourself to a god or something. This is just practical, everyday life advice that, you know, the wise man sitting at the corner store would tell you and be like, man, you're right. That makes a lot of sense. So wait till we go through some of the quotes of Confucius. And I think you'll also agree with that as well. John Kell throws in $20. Thank you so much, John. Really appreciate you, brother. God bless you and your family. And Josh Betts says, Father Josiah, or take two. Father Joshua, St. Innocent, is interested in a stream. Interesting. Josh Betts, can you email me at Church of the Eternal Logos at gmail.com, Church of the Eternal Logos at gmail.com, and be happy to chat with you about, I'm not familiar who Father Joshua is, so maybe I could email you and we could talk a little bit about that privately. So thank you very much, Josh. Really do appreciate that. And then let me just check over on the Dono chat and Streamlabs. See if anybody sent anything in. Also, I need a drink of water. My mouth is parched. Woo! And I need an Alp. I almost said the Z word. I need an Alp here. So let me throw one of these bad boys in the old upper deck here. Throw in an upper deck. Okay. You know, before we get focused on anything else, why don't we just also take care of some quick housekeeping? So guys, if you would like to support my work, one of the best things you could do is become a website member. Again, I just posted a video that had been up on my website for members for basically half a year. So if you were already a member for $5 a month, you could have already got access to this video right here, World War III and Orthodox Prophecies, the second half. That's been up for basically half a year, and I just made this available for YouTube members. So if you're now a $5 a month YouTube member, you can now watch this. But if you want to get access to these videos once I make them, and you want to be able to see the information once it's out, and once you just watch the stream, become a website member. I'd greatly appreciate that. It's $5 a month. It's a great way to help me out. I promise you'll get access to these show notes that I just showed you guys, the whole document. You get access to all that stuff, as well as 2 months free if you buy for the year. And then I have these members meetings, again, $25 a month to join our think tank, our private think tank. Also, if anybody wants to sign up for a one-on-one session, you can do so right here. Like to meet with people on Wednesdays, but if not, we can always work something out and discuss anything that your heart desires in a private Zoom meeting. And then special thank you again today goes out to Brendan for sponsoring today's great stream on Confucianism and Orthodoxy and conversation. Not a whole lot out there regarding this topic, so it was kind of a lot of legwork to put all that together and kind of create this conversation. But if you have a great topic you would like to sponsor, please do so with that link right there, and I will reach out to you, and we can come up with a working idea on what the topic is, and I will then present it once it's ready. So thank you guys all so much. And if you happen to be in the market for any Orthodox items, check out orthodoxdepot.com. Use promo code COTEL. You get 10% off icons, prayer ropes, incense, lamps, whatever it may be. And you can help me out, as well as a good Orthodox company here in the Midwest. So check out orthodoxdepot.com, promo code COTEL. All right, let's get back to where we were here. And I mentioned I wanted to address a few questions that Brendan had, but I think before we do that, why don't we just listen to some wisdom from Confucius real quick? Why don't we just listen to 40 quotes? This is what I got right here. 40 quotes of Confucius, and you'll get a flavor for what it is he's talking about. What are his teachings? What is his orientation? And then we'll dive deeper and deeper. I got notes, and then I got a whole documentary I want to show you guys right here, this BBC. So we may speed it up to 1.25, but it's going to be about 55 minutes of documentary. So we're going to conclude with that one right there. So anyways, let's listen to 40 quotes of Confucius, and then I will dive deeper into the topic here.
It does not matter how slowly you go at.
Oh, I probably got it sped up. I always have stuff sped up. Okay, here we go.
As long as you do not stop.
Quotes of Confucius.
It does not matter how slowly you go as long as you do not stop. The man who moves a mountain begins by carrying away small stones. Silence is a true friend who never betrays. Attack the evil that is within yourself, rather than attacking the evil that is in others.
So you can see, again, these are just little sage advices that we as Orthodox Christians could appropriate. This really isn't anything. Where's the AI Confucius voice? David, come on, man. But anyways, you see, this is pretty just sage, like old man advice. And in many ways, we can find like biblical principles in these things. So I'm gonna keep letting it play real quick. But you see, there's nothing in here that's like inherently theologically antagonistic to us as Orthodox Christians. There's a lot that we can, it's really the same. Well, not, I don't want to say the same, but many principles and biblical teachings kind of repackaged in this sort of natural, social, moral philosophy of Confucius. So let's continue.
Only the wisest and stupidest of men never change.
True, true.
By three methods we may learn wisdom. First, by reflection, which is noblest. Second, by imitation, which is easiest. And third, by experience, which is the bitterest. Life is really simple, but we insist on making it complicated. Respect yourself, and others will respect you. Everything has beauty, but not everyone sees it. He who knows all the answers has not been asked all the questions. The man who asks a question is a fool for a minute. The man who does not ask is a fool for life. When you see a good person, think of becoming like her or him. When you see someone not so good, reflect on your own weak points.
Okay, I'm going to speed it up to 1.25. Sorry, I just have an impatience for some of these long, drawn-out videos. And we got a lot to get through. So if you feel like it's going too fast, here's the trick, guys. Just move the video, my stream, to 1.75 or 0.75, and then you'll be back to normal. Because people always complain how I speed up videos. But we got a lot to get through, so we're going 1.25 on the rest of this.
What the superior man seeks is in himself. What the small man seeks is in others. I hear and I forget. I see and I remember. I do and I understand. Give a bowl of rice to a man, and you will feed him for a day. Teach him how to grow his own rice, and you will save his life.
See, it's like it's just another repackaging of teach a man how to fish, and he'll never go hungry. And another interesting thing, I don't know if you guys have heard of the silver rule. The golden rule that Christ teaches on his Sermon on the Mount, right? Do unto others as you wish they would do unto you. Confucius teaches basically the negative form of that, which is called the silver rule. Don't do unto others what you would wish they don't do to you. So again, it's very similar understanding and teaching there. Same principle, worded differently.
The gem cannot be polished without friction, nor man perfected without trials.
Embrace the suck.
We have two lives, and the second begins when we realize we only have one.
Not Eastern mysticism. This isn't about reincarnation. So this breaks from the dharmic traditions of, Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, all those reincarnational dharmic theologies, paradigms. Confucius isn't a part of that. You got one life. You got one opportunity.
Forget injuries, never forget kindnesses. Hold faithfulness and sincerity as first principles.
Confucius was big on your word is your bond. So when you say you're going to do something for Confucian, you do not break your word. That is partly what he means by faithfulness, is you're faithful to your word. This is an essential character for Confucian of what makes a man, which again, we can find this in Christianity as well. Don't break your word. Your word is your bond.
When it is obvious that the goals cannot be reached, don't adjust the goals, adjust the action steps. Don't do unto others what you don't want done unto you. If your plan is for 1 year, plant rice. If your plan is for 10 years, plant trees. If your plan is for 100 years, educate children. Don't
And I love that one because Confucianism, remember, all the emperors, all the rulers of his day rejected adopting Confucian principles. The reason why Confucianism exploded and took off is because young men would sit and talk about these Confucius principles with Confucius. And that he got a bunch of young men to adopt his program. And because of that, his teachings never died to this day in China.
complain about the snow on your neighbor's roof when your own doorstep is unclean.
So you guys got to get the gist. We're not going to watch all of this. But anyways, we got more to get through here. So a few key points that I wanted to mention because Brendan asked them when I was going back and forth with him through email regarding the topic. One of them was about how to view Confucianism from an Orthodox paradigm, because his point was that it's not apropos, it's not appropriate to sort of view it as satanic, because it's really not satanic. It's not sort of theistic worldview that's totally in opposition to us as Orthodox Christians. And my point, which I'm sure he's probably already heard, to me, we need another Orthodox clergyman, another Hiram monk like Hiram Monk Damascene to write, Christ the Eternal Tao. This is specifically regarding the Tao Te Ching and the teachings of Lao Tzu, the teacher. But I think the same principles of Logos Spermatikos apply to Confucianism. Now, Confucianism on itself, I would argue, is a totally inferior paradigm because of its lack of an understanding of, I'm an Orthodox Christian. I believe our Orthodox metaphysics, our Logos theology is superior to their understanding of Tien and heaven. But these principles, this understanding of communal ethical behavior and how it brings about moral how it brings about harmony and order within society, this is very Orthodox. And as you saw in some of these quotes, it's not exactly, yes, John Kell says similar to Stoicism. Yeah, similar to Stoicism. The difference with Stoicism is that Stoicism adopted the understanding of Logos, but for them, Logos was nature. Logos was the universe. Logos was natural order itself. So I think you could certainly draw an affinity between Stoicism and Taoism. So Stoicism, we'd have to maybe correct some of their understandings regarding Logos and how that understood. But the way for Stoics, the way that you align yourself with Logos is through personal virtue, which is exactly what we're doing as Orthodox Christians in Theosis. Although we're not doing it for personal virtue, we're doing it because the Logos came as man, Jesus Christ, the God man, and showed us how it is that we can enter into eternity through the grace, the gift of grace that God has bestowed on us to become like him, the telos of creation in the first place. So, oh, first person Q, hilarious, bro. So anyways, I think that's a important delineation. So should we understand Confucianism as satanic? No, just like we shouldn't understand Taoism as satanic or Stoicism as satanic. Now, when we get into things that are explicitly in opposition to our worldview, like veneration and worship of a God that's not the Holy Trinity, or aspects of Hinduism, I think there are vulgar aspects of Hinduism that we could certainly say, okay, that practice there and what they're doing is what appears in our paradigm and our Orthodox phronema as a form of demonic possession. That looks satanic. you can't really find that in Confucianism. So I would say the way that we should approach Confucianism as an Orthodox Christian is logos spermaticos, the seeds of Christ, the seeds of logos, the seeds of ultimate truth can be found in there. It doesn't have the fullness, it doesn't have the whole thing, but just like Taoism, there's a lot of fertile seeds. And the only thing that can explain the continual existence of the Chinese, again, various dynasties, but the empire itself of China is through Taoism and Confucianism. And if those things didn't have seeds of truth in them, there's no way that they would still exist in 2025. They would have flown away. It'd been like Manichaean. It'd already been done away with if it was entirely wrong. No, it's still present, and it has real efficaciousness to the societies that adopt some of these principles. So anyways, that was the first point. The second one he asked, are Confucians primed for orthodoxy? And I would say, given everything I just said regarding some of these ethical and moral principles being similar, I would say those are the similarities. But for Confucian to adopt an orthodox paradigm of a holy trinity, of a transcendent deity, of the energy essence distinction, I would say that's actually that's a bigger gap than I think we might suppose, because that's a totally different paradigm of understanding. Could real Orthodox roots be planted within China? Yeah, we see absolutely. And people that are driven for truth will be able to see the fullness of truth available within the Orthodox Church. Are Confucians primed? I don't know. They certainly have a good foundation to build bridges on, but the bridge, it's going to be a longer bridge than maybe other ideologies. The bridge between Stoicism and Orthodoxy isn't as big as the bridge between Confucianism and Orthodoxy, because the paradigm, at least Stoicism had that Western Greek philosophical basis for metaphysics. It was influenced by Plato and Aristotle. It adopts many of the framework of our paradigm now, but Confucianism does not. So is it prime? Could be, but the bridge from Confucianism to Orthodoxy, I think, is a longer bridge than something like Stoicism to Orthodoxy. And then the last one is, he asked me to address Shunzi. Let me pull this up. So Shunzi. So here are the two major students, and these weren't students that lived during the time of Confucius. These are major Confucius philosophers. The first one is Mencius, and again, Chinese Confucian philosopher, often described as the second sage, the great sage being Confucius. To reflect his traditional esteem relative to Confucius himself, he was part of Confucius' fourth generation of disciples, inheriting his ideology and developing it further, living during the Warring States period. Again, go back to our timeline here, Warring States period right here. So that's 475 to 221 BC, so still before Christ with Mencius. But one of the claims that Mencius had is that humanity is innately good. He argued that he believed that essentially humans have an innate sense of morality. And I would chalk that up to Paul talking about how God has written the moral code on the heart of every individual. And in that sense, I think Orthodoxy agrees with Mencius when he says that every person has an innate sense of objective morality. I would say Orthodoxy says, yeah, that's because God implanted that. He wrote that law, that moral objective law, in the heart of every individual. Now, Shunzi, this one right here, Chinese philosopher during the Warring States after his predecessors Confucius and Mencius, Shunzi is often ranked as the third great Confucian philosopher of antiquity. By his name, Confucianism had suffered considerable criticism from Taoist and Moist thinkers. And so he is traditionally regarded as the synthesizer of these traditions with earlier Confucian thought. Shunzi argued that people are naturally driven by desires, self-interest, and disorder. And so they, in a way, are innately bad. And so through Confucius education, that people then can redirect, acquire self-discipline, education, participation in rituals, and that they can become the moral, virtuous person that they should be, that's beneficial and efficacious for society. And Brendan asked, what are my thoughts on Shunzi's understanding as a sort of inherent clouded disposition amongst humanity and our understanding of the fall. And I would say this is where Orthodox, I'd say we would agree with aspects of Shunzi and we agree with aspects of Mencius. So as Mencius says that we're all innately good and that everybody's oriented towards that objective morality, Christianity says it's written on the heart. As Shunzi says that we're all sort of led by our desires and that we had to be educated, we would say that's because of the fall. Now, obviously, we don't adopt Augustinian original sin where you inherit the guilt of your ancestors or Adam. You and I are not guilty for what Adam did in our Orthodox paradigm, but we exist in the consequences of the fall. And so because of that, our noetic faculties are clouded and we are sort of naturally inclined to disorder, to pursue our passions, to pursue sin. And so I would argue addressing that last question that Brendan had, I would say orthodoxy is the perfect medium point between both Mencius and Shunzi, and that we really don't adopt one over the other because, in a sense, both of them are hinting at something that orthodoxy also explicates. So just want to throw that in there. And so with that being said, let's get a little bit into the document here. Let me just go through some of these. So I introduced you guys to the map, Mencius, Shunzi, Emperor Wu of Han. So he is, again, reigned. He was one of the big important Confucius emperors. His reign resulted in a vast expansion of geopolitical influence for the Chinese civilization and the development of strong centralized state via governmental policies, economical reorganization, and prompted by a hybrid legalist Confucian doctrine. In the field of historical and cultural studies, Emperor Wu is known for his religious innovations and patronage of the poetic and musical arts, including development of the Imperial Music Bureau into a prestigious entity. And so they're like, I don't remember all of them, but there's like 7 areas in which Confucius advocated for people to develop. And so one of them was music, one was calligraphy, one was like archery, one was charioteering and being able to ride a horse. These were things that Confucius said, if you're going to be a junzi, if you're going to be the gentleman, if you're going to be the superior person, you need to have some sort of proficiency in all these different things. I think poetry was one of them, or reading. So sorry, I didn't write all those down, but just throwing that in there. And then Emperor Kangxi, I'm going to introduce him in the notes in the document as well. And he is the longest reigning emperor in Chinese history, and he is considered one of China's greatest emperors. And so, after assuming personal rule, Kangxi's attempt to revoke the fiefdoms of feudal princes sparked the revolt of the 3 feudatories, which he suppressed. He also forced the kingdom of Tungning in Taiwan and Mongols in the north and northwest to submit to Qing rule, and launched an expedition that incorporated Tibet into the empire. Domestically, he initially welcomed the Jesuits and the propagation of Catholicism in China, but tolerance came to an end as a result of the Chinese rights controversy. Later in his reign, Kangxi became embroiled in a prolonged succession dispute. He died in 1722, so pretty recent regarding this historical timeline, at the age of 68, and was succeeded by his 4th son. So when we go back to our timeline here, we can see here the Qing dynasty. So when we're talking about Kangxi, we're talking about here. When we're talking about Wu of Han, we're talking right here, 206 BC to 220 AD. So just again, I like to know the historical timeline for myself. We already talked about that. The Analects, Duke of Zhou, was a member of the royal family of the early Zhou dynasty, who played a major role in consolidating the kingdom established by his older brother, King Wu. And so it's interesting. He is what is the phrase? The God of Dreams. That's what I'm looking for right here. I'm glad it was right there. So Duke of, I thought this was interesting. I'm sharing it with you. There's more I could share with you guys, but you guys, at least you know about it. You can go look it up yourself. But I thought this was interesting. The Duke of Zhou is also known as the God of Dreams. The Analects record Confucius saying, "How I have gone downhill. It has been such a long time since I dreamt of the Duke of Zhou." This was meant as a lamentation of how the governmental ideals of the Duke of Zhou had faded, but was later taken literally. In Chinese legend, is an important thing is going to happen to someone. The Duke of Zhou will let the person know through dreams, hence the Chinese expression, dreaming of Zhou Gong. So, yeah, just throwing that in there in case you weren't aware. Zhou Dynasty, important within this whole historical context. You guys can look that up. Forbidden City, I was able to visit this. It's an incredible place. And so it was the residence of 24 Ming and Qing dynasty emperors. Well, this will come up in the documentary. And then the Church of the East. This was actually a topic that I want to do a better stream on. I read this book when I was first getting into Orthodoxy. I was still not an Orthodox Christian. And I read this book, The Jesus Sutras, Rediscovering the Lost Religion of Taoist Christianity. I would love to do a fuller stream on this and read all these sort of Taoist Buddhist sutras related to Christ and the luminous religion of light, which is what the translation, the Jingjiao. I hate Wade Giles. So if you guys have ever studied like Chinese, pinyin is so far superior. This is pinyin, right? So then this is Jingjiao. Wade Giles is like Ching Chiao. Wade Giles sucks. I hate Wade Giles. That was the Thinking Through Confucius. All his stuff is in Wade Giles' phonetic translations of Chinese words. Pinyin is so superior. But I have a little section on the Church of the East within our notes section. So let's just dive into that. So let me just see if anybody sent in any other questions. Robert Cesario throws in 5 and says, neat topic, but remember, Confucius say, man who doesn't eat pork bun is no man at all. I haven't heard that one, Robert, but thank you for sharing that. Do appreciate. And then let me just see if anybody sent anything over on StreamYard. Nope. Okay. All right. Let's get to our notes here. Okay. So Confucianism from an Orthodox perspective. Much of this stuff, I'm going to be skipping some stuff because I don't want to read this entire document. It's 15 pages. I want to skip to sections that I think are really important to give you a fuller understanding of what this Confucianism is, how it relates to our Orthodox paradigm. And then we'll get into the documentary, which will give you, it's always easier to watch something once you already have a background knowledge of it, because it reiterates things that you already know. So what is Confucianism? It is a Chinese philosophical, ethical, and social tradition founded on the teachings of Confucius. You already know that. While debated whether it is a religion, philosophy, or political system, Confucianism has profoundly shaped Chinese culture, politics, education, and society for over 2 millennia. It emphasizes virtue, relationships, education, and social harmony, providing a blueprint for the ethical living and good governance. Confucianism is not centered on worshiping a deity or a revealed scripture, but on cultivating human potential, promoting moral leadership, and aligning with the natural and cosmic order, Tien. Today, it is seen as a cultural and philosophical tradition that has influenced much of East Asia, including Korea, Japan, and Vietnam. So here, this is important. These are the 5 constants, the core virtues of Confucianism. As I said, Ren, benevolence, humaneness, compassion, the central virtue in Confucianism, emphasizing kindness, compassion, and empathy towards others. You can really translate Ren as empathy. And this is the central teaching. So it is the highest Confucian virtue, emphasizing kindness, compassion, and empathy. A passage I found in the Analects: to subdue oneself and return to propriety is humanity. What you do not wish for yourself, do not do to others. Again, we've already highlighted that's what's called the silver rule. And then significance, Ren is the foundation of ethical behavior and the ideal moral character. What about Li? Ritual propriety, adherence to rituals, customs, and social norms to cultivate moral behavior and maintain harmony, correct behavior and ritual ceremonies and daily interactions, ensuing order and respect in society. Example passage. If a man is not respectful, he cannot inspire awe. If he is not generous, he cannot win the hearts of the people. So Li fosters a sense of discipline and social harmony, shaping proper conduct. Yi, righteousness, acting according to the moral principles rather than personal gain, doing what is morally right. Acting according to these moral principles. Example passage. The noble man is aware of righteousness. The inferior man is aware of profit. Significance, it encourages the moral decision-making of selfish ambition. Wisdom, knowledge applied to the ethical insights and good judgment, the ability to discern what is just and true. So it's the intellectual and ethical understanding that guides proper actions. A gentleman learns extensively, questions earnestly, reflects carefully, and applies what he has learned intelligently. See, can't disagree with that. Can't disagree with it. Education is essential for self-cultivation. Shin, integrity, faithfulness and honesty in relationships and actions. Being honest, reliable, and true to one's word. This is central to Confucianism. Without trust, the people will not stand by you, Confucius says. And this is critical for leadership, relationships, and social stability. Next important point. So I have, 9 important points in understanding Confucianism. Filial piety. We already talked about this. A cornerstone of Confucian ethics, filial piety emphasizes respect, obedience, and care for one's parents, elders, and ancestors, and considered the foundation of societal and familial harmony. And I'll say this, that as Westerners, we put our ancestors into nursing homes. And in most of the world, but especially in Chinese culture, your parents come and live with you. It is your filial pietal duty to take care of your parents as they get older. And I saw one Confucian, a contemporary Chinese man. So he's living right now in the 21st century. And his point was he takes seriously his sort of Confucian ethics and was talking about how his mother has dementia and all this stuff. And that, when people get older, it is part of the duty of the children to take care of them because they become like children. So it's like we move, again, this gets into that Confucian understanding of continual being, like everything's moving. So we become children, we become adults, and then we become old people, and old people in a way are becoming more like children again. And so his point was that, you don't leave your parents alone, just like you don't leave children alone. And so, as I said, Confucius lost his father at 3, and some think that influenced his promotion of filial piety. The 5 relationships, already talked about that. Ruler and subject, parent and child, husband and wife, elder sibling, younger sibling, friend and friend. Each relationship is hierarchical and reciprocal, emphasizing duties and responsibilities. The ideal person, Junzi, we already talked about that. Don't need to say more. Heaven, Tien, we already talked a little bit about that. Don't really need to say more. Heaven is not anthropomorphized, but represents a moral order that governs the universe. The mandate of heaven legitimizes rulers who act morally. And we see that with the 2 longest, again, and that's going to come up in this document, the 2 longest emperors in Chinese history. Education and self-cultivation. Confucius stressed the importance of lifelong learning, intellectual development, and ethical refinement as a way to better oneself in society. Rituals and harmony, Li, are not just formal ceremonies, but include daily acts of respect, gratitude, and proper behavior that maintain harmony in relationships to society. I saw in one documentary a Chinese Confucian, I don't know if you'd call him a priest, but he's the ritual leader. He performs these major Confucian rituals in China. And he was talking about the way that a Confucian engages with another person. When you go to meet them, it's very stoic. The way that you shake your hand is part of the ritual. The way that you address them in a very formal way is part of the ritual. And his point was, you don't go up and say, "Oh, it's so good to see you," and then like grab their hand with 2 hands. The point is to be calm, stoic, address the hierarchy, address them formally, shake their hand, look them in the eyes. And so, when if you watch movies, back in the 18th, 19th, early 20th century, the way that people dressed in the West, the formality, the way they engaged themselves, Mr. and Sir, I would think that would sort of represent something that Confucianism is trying to maintain in these proper relationships, that the way you address people and recognizing hierarchy and where they're at within the sort of social milieu of things. The doctrine of the mean, everything is about balancing, right? Balancing one's actions and emotions to maintain equilibrium and harmony in life. The doctrine of the mean, and then the rectification of names, ensuring that societal norms and titles reflect reality and that people act according to their position. So the rectification of names had to do with bestowing titles on people. Confucius was about bestowing titles on people, but those titles had to represent meritocratic competency and whatever the title represented. He was not interested in people getting positions due to nepotism. Just because, your daddy did that, if you don't have the skills, that's not your title. You don't get to do it. You have to be competent, and he preferred a meritocratic system. Confucian texts, we already mentioned the 4 books, the Analects, Mencius, the Great Learning, and the Doctrine of the Mean. These are sort of the 4 books, but the 5 classics, which you've probably heard of, is the Book of Changes, the Book of History, the Book of Poetry, the Book of Rites, and the Spring and Autumn Annals. Those are sort of the major texts in regarding Confucianism. Historical development. As we already said, he lived during the Spring and Autumn period, a time of political turmoil, lots of war. He sought to restore order through ethical governance and virtuous leadership. We already talked a little bit about his earlier life in the opening. Career and teachings. Confucius worked in various government positions, but became disillusioned with political corruption. He traveled widely, offering his ideas on governance and morality to rulers, but his proposals were largely ignored. Later, he focused on teaching and attracting a group of disciples who recorded his sayings in the Analects. And those are the young men who basically continued the tradition forward. Philosophical contributions. Confucius emphasized moral integrity, proper conduct, and the cultivation of virtue. He sought to create a harmonious society through education and ethical leadership. Death and legacy. Confucius died in relative obscurity, but his disciples preserved and propagated his ideas, which later shaped Chinese civilization to the present day. Mencius and Xunzi, we already highlighted. Expanded Confucius' teachings. Mencius did, asserting that human nature is inherently good and rulers must act with benevolence. Xunzi provided a contrasting view, arguing that humans are naturally selfish and require strict discipline and education. The Han Dynasty, this is where Confucianism became the official state ideology under Emperor Wu of Han, with Confucian texts forming the basis of the imperial examination system, which we've already kind of mentioned. And the Gaokao, which I'm going to highlight, is that modern reiteration of that same Confucian ethic today. Neo-Confucianism, that really begins during the Song and Ming dynasties. So thinkers such as Jushi synthesized Confucianism with Taoist and Buddhist metaphysics, emphasizing Li and Qi. Wang Yongming introduced the idea of innate moral knowledge, arguing that morality comes from within. And then the modern era, during the May 4th movement in 1919, Confucianism was criticized as outdated. However, it has experienced a revival in recent decades, with Chinese leaders emphasizing Confucian values as a part of cultural nationalism. And so here's a bit of a historic timeline. I'm not going to go through it, but when was, Confucius' teachings? Early dissemination, 5th and 3rd century BC. Confucius' disciples, particularly Mencius and Xunzi, expanded and debated his ideas. Han Dynasty, state adoption. Emperor Wu of Han, we mentioned. And then the Tang Dynasty. This is going to come back up when we talk about the first time Christianity enters Chinese society. It's during the Tang Dynasty. And Confucianism coexisted with Buddhism, Taoism, integrating metaphysical elements into its framework. And then the Song Dynasty and Neo-Confucianism. Thinkers like Jushi synthesized Confucianism with Buddhist and Taoist ideas, emphasizing metaphysics and self-cultivation. Ming Dynasty, we get the sort of Orthodox Neo-Confucianism remained dominant, but critical voices like Wang Yangming advocated for the primacy of intuition over textual study. Decline, modern challenges, 19th, 20th century. And then within the last 20 years, there's been a great Confucian revival. And then Confucianism today, cultural influence, obviously very important. Confucian revival in contemporary China, Confucianism is being promoted as a source of moral and cultural identity. Institutions like Confucius Institute, which is the institute that I got a scholarship from to go to China. So when I talked to you guys about going to China, I did that through the Confucius Institute, which was at IUPUI, Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. I think they've recently changed their name. I don't think Purdue is part of it. But anyways, if you went into engineering or STEM, you get a Purdue degree. All the other degrees were IU. And that was kind of the thing, is you can be in downtown Indianapolis and not have to be in Lafayette or Purdue or Bloomington at IU. And apparently the Chinese government got confused. And when they went to establish a Confucius Institute at Bloomington, they sent it to Indianapolis. And so IUPUI had a Confucius Institute, although it got shut down because the Confucius Institutes throughout the U.S. Sort of garnered a reputation for CCP spies. And so people would be teachers. They would teach Chinese at the Confucius Institute, which really just like promoted Chinese culture, language, history. But some CCP spies were in the institute, and that's why eventually they got shut down. So Confucianism and its relationship with the state, we mentioned moral legitimacy of the rule, mandate of heaven, governance and bureaucracy. Confucian ideals shaped governance by emphasizing the importance of education. And then the empirical, it was the Kuji. I was right. I couldn't remember the Chinese for the imperial exam. It's the Kuju. Based on Confucian classics, ensured that government officials were selected based on merit rather than aristocratic privilege, right? Very, very meritocratic, very Confucian. If you had to memorize the classics, you had to memorize the Analects, and then you'd have all these series of question and answers for 3 days, and the top 1% to 2% were basically brought into the government and given very high titles and prestige. And you could be very lowly. And this was an opportunity for Chinese people. These imperial exams, the Kuju, is you may have been very poor, but maybe you're gifted intellectually. And if you are able to memorize all this stuff and take the imperial exam and you test really well, you could literally transform your family by going from a poor boy in a small town in China, and now you work for the government, you have a prestigious title, you make a lot of money, and now you can basically elevate the whole of your family. So this is novel. Back in the ancient days, people didn't really focus on that meritocratic element like Confucianism did. And then social harmony, you get it. Dynastic emphasis on Confucianism, kind of things we already mentioned. Again, if you guys want to read all this document in detail, go become a website member for $5. You'll get access to it. And I'm going to send this to Brendan so he can I always send it to people who sponsor streams in case they want it. So dynasties with less emphasis on Confucianism: Qing, Yuan, Qin. So anyways, Gaokao, that's the National Higher Education Entrance Examination, can trace its origins to the imperial examination system, the Kuju, which was based on Confucian texts. Like the Kuju, the Gaokao emphasizes meritocracy, rewarding academic achievement and hard work over social and economic status. Gaokao is still very important within Chinese culture today. And then Chinese emperors who best embodied the Confucian principles. Number one, as we already said, is the Emperor Wu of Han, who is the Confucian patron. He's the one that really codifies and establishes Chinese culture and society being driven by Confucian values. And so key Confucian values embodied: moral leadership, meritocracy, education, and the mandate of heaven. Why Emperor Wu exemplifies Confucianism? Emperor Wu was the first Chinese ruler to institutionalize Confucianism as the official state ideology. Before his reign, China was still under the influence of legalist policies inherited from the Qin dynasty, which was focused on strict laws and harsh punishments. Recognizing the need for a more stable moral government, Emperor Wu of Han elevated Confucianism to the guiding philosophy of the state. And what did he do? What were some of the policies? The state adoption of Confucianism, 136 BC. The creation of the imperial examination, precursor to the Gaokao, as we said, the Kuju, through the full service exam system developed later. Wu's efforts laid the foundation for the meritocratic bureaucracy of China. Moral leadership, mandate of heaven, and then promotion of education and scholarship. The next one is the Emperor Kangxi, the philosopher king of the Qing dynasty, the longest reigning emperor in Chinese history. And what were some of his policies? Promotion of education and scholarship. Personally studied Confucian texts and was known for his deep understanding of the Analects. Ordered the Kangxi Dictionary, which was one of the greatest scholarly achievements of Chinese history. Founded imperial schools to ensure that officials were well versed in Confucian teachings. Benevolent rule and relationship with officials, treated scholars with respect, embodying the Confucian ideal that a ruler should listen to wise advisors. And he sought harmony with Han Chinese and the Manchu rule by adopting Confucian rituals. Again, rituals and the participation in the ritual being the sort of, if we're going to use Durkheimian language, the sort of collective effervescence, the collective solidarity of the community is through the ritual. And then moral governance and public welfare, and then stability and rituals again. So that is Kangxi. And then here's a few more. The wise ruler, Emperor Taizong of Tang. Again, I'm a big fan of the Tang dynasty. You'll see why here in just a little bit. And then Emperor Hongwu, the Confucian reformer. You guys can read more if you're interested. I put together some tables here looking at comparison between Confucianism and Taoism, right? Because some of you guys may be familiar with Taoism and you're asking, well, what exactly is the difference between some of the stuff? It sounds very Taoist. And to some degree, there's certainly an overlap there. And so this little chart helps, this table helps identify. So what's the goal of Confucianism? Ethical society, social harmony. Taoism, harmony with the Tao, personal freedom. Approach to society, active engagement, reform through governance. Withdrawal, non-interference, Wu Wei, right? You don't get in the way of the Tao in Taoism. You're supposed to ride it. You're supposed to ride that wave. Human nature, inherently good or neutral, cultivated by effort, and then naturally aligned with the Tao. Ethics, relational, hierarchical, duty-bound. Again, what I call relational ethics. And then Taoism is spontaneous, natural, and individualistic. Rituals, central to moral cultivation, downplayed in philosophical Taoism. Divine concept and personal Tien. Tao as the ultimate ineffable principle. Focus on the collective, family, and state. Taoism focuses on the individual and personal enlightenment. Governance, hierarchical, moral leadership within Confucianism. And then minimalist, non-coercive in Taoism. Formal education regards to knowledge, formal education, study of text. And then Taoism emphasizes intuitive experiential learning. And then afterlife, very much de-emphasized in Confucianism and is explored in religious Taoism, but it's not explicitly the focus like salvation is in Christianity. So you can see based on this chart why Confucianism and Taoism sort of go hand in hand together. Because in ways they are sort of the yin and yang. They very much complement each other in many ways. Now, Eastern Orthodox Christianity and Confucianism. So I put together a few charts before I start going into the details, just looking at the paradigm. So concept of Confucianism in regards to deism and then theism, which we are as Orthodox Christians. God/ultimate being, Tien, a moral order, not a personal deity in Confucianism. Deism, a creator who does not intervene. And then we as Christians, a personal, omniscient, omnipotent God who can intervene within space and time, and incarnated within space and time. Moral authority based on virtue, hierarchy, and tradition. Deism is based on rational moral order. And then theism is based on divine command and revelation. Afterlife, emphasis on legacy, no clear doctrine. Deism is kind of uncertain or absent regarding the afterlife. And then theism is explicit about heaven and hell. Again, we don't believe in reincarnation, but I just included that regarding other quote unquote theistic worldviews. But we're just going to keep it Christian. It's heaven and hell. Ancestor role, respected and honored, but not divine. Deism, no role with ancestors. And then in Orthodoxy, at least, it's no, we don't worship our ancestors, but if you're Catholic or Orthodox, you can certainly pray for your ancestors. And then the roles of the saints are kind of that spiritual ancestral continuity. And then spiritual continuity, rituals preserve presence. Souls may or may not exist. And then souls are eternal and judged by God in theism. And then epistemology, this is just a quick little, again, I was trying to define what I called pragmatic virtue epistemology of Confucianism. So knowledge is moral, practical, relational. Western epistemology, we're talking about philosophy. This is Western epistemology as philosophy, not revealed tradition. Theoretical, abstract, and universal. Method of learning, tradition, mentorship, ritual, and self-cultivation. Western epistemology, rational deduction or empirical observation. Sources of knowledge, historical wisdom, elders, and self-examination in Confucianism. And then Western epistemology, reason, perception, and scientific method. Purpose of knowledge, ethical living, social harmony for Confucianism, and then truth-seeking and objective analysis of Western epistemology. So now let's look at some of the specific similarities between Orthodoxy and Confucianism. So the focus on virtue and moral cultivation. We emphasize virtues such as humility, love, and obedience to God's will. These virtues are cultivated through ascetic practices, prayer, and participation in the sacraments. There's not going to be any sort of sacramental element within Confucianism, even though it's highly ritualistic. They're not sacraments. It's a focus on benevolence, proper conduct, righteousness. Virtue is developed through self-discipline, education, and adherence to rituals. Relational ethics, kind of highlighted that earlier, that both are very much understood ethics in regards to relationship to others. Orthodoxy is theologically rooted within the Trinity. Orthodox Christianity views relationships as reflective of divine love. Human relationships should mirror the self-giving love found in the relationship between Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And Confucianism stresses the 5 relationships, as we talked about earlier. Harmony and order. Both Orthodoxy and Confucianism have a strong emphasis on harmony and order. We seek spiritual harmony between humanity and God, reflecting God's created order. Liturgical practices and church governance reflect a profound sense of divine order. Confucianism strives for societal harmony through ethical behavior and proper governance. Role of education. We value theological education and spiritual instruction for deepening one's faith and understanding of God's will. Saints, church fathers, monastic communities are often educators in the faith. Confucianism is much more of a sort of secular cultural education, but both have a strong emphasis in regards to education to some degree. Transcendent moral authority. We have a belief in God as the ultimate source of morality and the standard of good. Confucianism, while not theistic, the concept of heaven again functions as a sort of transcendent moral authority, guiding rulers and individuals toward righteousness. And then a communal emphasis. Again, the church is a mystical body emphasizing communal worship of God and mutual love among believers. Confucianism focuses on society as a community where individuals fulfill, again, their roles of the greater harmony of the all. Now, what are the big differences? Because I think I have 10 big differences between Orthodoxy and Confucianism. The fact that there's 10 kind of highlights, as my point earlier regarding is Confucianism primed for Orthodox converts? It's a bit of a long bridge when we're talking about paradigms here. So the first one is obviously nature of the divine. So in Orthodox, we have a deeply theistic tradition, centered on the worship of the triune God. The incarnation of Christ is central to salvation, emphasizing God's active presence in human history. Confucianism lacks any theistic framework and serves as a sort of moral order, not worshipped as a deity. Confucianism is more focused on human-centered ethics and social harmony. Salvation and afterlife, obviously going to be another big difference. We view salvation as the process of theosis, deification, where humans become united with God. Belief in eternal life, heaven and hell is central. Confucianism does not address salvation of the afterlife directly. Instead, it focuses on living virtuously. Rituals and worship. Now, Patrick, I thought you said Confucianism is all about rituals. I am, but they're different. See, our rituals, if you will, is a worship. It's liturgical and sacramental. It's imbued with uncreated energies of the divine transcendent Godhead. These practices, such as the divine liturgy, the Eucharist, and prayer, being central to communal and personal spiritual life. Confucianism is more about maintaining social propriety and harmony. Ancestral worship is common, but there is no worship of deities or gods in the religious sense. Big difference. View on human nature. We believe in the fall of Adam and Eve, which introduced sin into human nature and death. Cultivation or salvation restores humans to their intended state. And then, as I said, Mencius says we're good. Shunzi says we're bad. But both can be corrected and fulfilled through moral education. The role of law. We emphasize the divine law as revealed in Scripture. Remember, Confucianism is not a revealed tradition. It is not a revealed tradition. It is a social moral philosophy that incorporates ritualistic elements. And so this is interpreted through the church and applied in daily life. Confucianism focuses on ethical conduct and societal norms rather than divine laws. The law is a tool of governance that is secondary to moral example and education. And then individual as collective salvation / good. Salvation is personal, but occurs within the communal life of the church, the body of Christ. Confucianism, the focus is on collective harmony rather than the individual spiritual salvation. No focus on that whatsoever. Philosophy versus religion. Orthodoxy is a religion with explicit theological doctrines, practices, and metaphysical beliefs about God, humanity, and the universe. Confucianism, often debated as either a philosophy or a religion, as it lacks doctrines about the divine and focus on ethical and political teachings instead. And then metaphysics, we already hinted at. We have a logos-driven metaphysics. Metaphysics are built upon the incarnate logos of the second person of the Trinity as the beginning and end of all things. And then Confucianism has what I pulled this from, again, thinking through Confucius. So a major shout out to Brendan for sending me a few pages. They describe this polar metaphysics with a dynamic focus on process of relationality. And the authors of that book, Thinking Through Confucius, their whole point was that the dualistic framework of the West and even part of Christianity, and for example, dualism of created, not created, creator, created, right? Transcendent God, outside time, within and somebody. That, so we're not talking about just dialectical philosophy or dialectical thinking per se, but that we have static categories, we have essences and substances, and we create categories of oppositions to some degree to come to a better understanding. Confucianism doesn't have those dualisms, so it's kind of a polar metaphysics where, for example, being and non-being within the West, Confucianism would say that being is in the process of becoming non-being, and non-being is in the process of becoming being. And so it's just this dynamic flow. So a totally different metaphysics. In regards to logos and order, I don't need to go over this. You guys know what the logos is. Word, reason, the word of God, central to orthodoxy. Core features, divine unity and order, harmony and creation. Theosis, our ability to participate in that divine order and becoming like Christ, and then a Christ-centered fulfillment. This is the core features of this logos theology of orthodoxy. When we look at Confucianism and understanding harmony and unity, what is harmony, and unity? In Confucianism, harmony and unity are central principles for maintaining societal order. Again, cultivating virtue and aligning human life with the cosmic and moral order of heaven. Is not uniformity, but a proper balancing and integration of differences, ensuring that the relationships and systems function cohesively. Core features of human harmony and unity, again, the order of heaven, human-centered ethics, and then balance and moderation. So points of contention between these two frameworks is a unified cosmic framework. We have the logos that originates the unbegotten Son of the Father. And Confucianism has a moral order of heaven, centrality of virtue. Both emphasize the cultivation of virtue to align with the cosmic and divine order. However, humans are called to align their lives with the divine will of God, imitating Christ, the incarnate logos, through virtues like humility, love, and prayer. Confucianism, harmony depends on virtues like benevolence, righteousness developed through self-discipline and education. Relational ethics, we mentioned that. and then participation in higher principles. In both systems, individuals are called to participate in a greater order. It's that through theosis, humans participate in God's divine energies and achieve unity with him, a transcendent, a heavenly, a eternal order of a creator God. Confucianism, by cultivating virtue and fulfilling one's social roles, individuals align with Tien and contribute to societal harmony. So differences between Logos and Confucian harmony: the source of order, the role of humanity, the salvation and social harmony, the theological and humanistic focus, sin and redemption. So we're focusing on sin. Logos is central on redeeming humanity from sin. Confucian, there is no concept of sin or need for redemption. Instead, disharmony arises from ignorance, poor education, and failure to observe the rituals and propriety. Transcendence and immanence. This is one that, in that book, Thinking Through Confucius, they're kind of calling into question this dichotomy. Um, I think that this is true, that Confucianism is more about an immanent order, an immanent transcendence, like the ancestors, like the mandate of heaven, versus sort of fully transcendent worldview like Orthodoxy. The Logos transcends creation, but also enters into it through the incarnations, reconciling the divine and the human. In Confucianism, harmony is immanent, achieved through aligning human behavior with the moral and cosmic order of heaven. And so this last point has to do with this book here, which I find an incredible piece of Christian history that really don't hear talked about much. And this has to do with the entrance of the missionary Alopen into the Tang Dynasty. So Christianity first arrived in China during the Tang Dynasty through the Nestorian Church, which became known in Chinese as Jingjiao, the luminous religion, the religion of light. And that's what I loved about this, is that the Tang emperor actually recognized that Christianity was a really interesting and unique worldview. And they called it the luminous religion, the religion of light. And this early period of Christianity in China provides a fascinating lens to explore how it interacted with the dominant religious and philosophical traditions of Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. The relationship between Christianity and those traditions was marked by mutual influence, adaptation, and competition. And so this is the Church of the East, though. This is not Orthodoxy. This is the Church of the East, which is Nestorian. So this is the Nestorian Church. But still very interesting history that I haven't heard a lot of people talk about. The mission of Alopen as Nestorian Christian monk from the Church of the East marks the first recorded introduction of Christianity into China during the Tang Dynasty. His arrival in 635 AD under the rule of Emperor Taizong of Tang represents one of the earliest documented interactions between Christianity and Chinese civilization. Alopen's mission was part of a broader movement of Nestorian Christianity along the Silk Road, which facilitated cultural and religious exchanges between Persia, Central Asia, and China. And so, again, Christian arrival in China in 635 AD, the Nestorian monk Alopen arrived in the Tang capital of Chang'an, today Xi'an, which I had the privilege of going to when I was in China, going to Xi'an and seeing many of the ancient buildings there. Wonderful, wonderful experience. Alopen presented Christian scriptures and teachings to Emperor Taizong, who welcomed the religion as part of the Tang Dynasty. And part of it was, when you read this book, is that the Christians were willing to fight the Mongols coming in from the north. And so there is the Jingjiao Pagoda, the Christian pagoda in Xi'an, which was recently discovered. It was like discovered in, was it the 80s or the 90s? So fairly recently. It was totally a forgotten piece of history. And that's what this book is documenting, is that Martin Palmer, who I believe is Anglican, he's going back. And so in this book, he's going to, it's the Daqin Pagoda. I think that's what it is, the Daqin Pagoda, not the Jingjiao. Jingjiao is the name of Christianity. It's the Daqin Pagoda, I believe. And filled with iconography, Christian iconography on the inside. And it does have this mixture of Taoism and Buddhism in it. Most specifically Taoism. But the reason why the Tang emperor allowed the Christians to stay there, even though, there was like a competing religious system, and allowed them to even try to convert people, was because they were such fierce warriors that they were willing to sacrifice themselves to fight off the Mongols, which I thought was pretty interesting. And so a stone inscription, the 780 AD, known as the Nestorian Stele, provides detailed accounts of Christianity's early presence, explaining its doctrine and celebrating its acceptance under Tang emperors. Why did it struggle? Competition with established traditions. Tang religious policy, although initially tolerant, the Tang dynasty shifted towards anti-foreign policies after the mid-8th century due to internal strife and external invasions. In 845, Emperor Wuzong enacted the Great Anti-Buddhist Persecution, which also targeted Nestorian Christians as part of a broader crackdown on foreign religions, and then cultural barriers, stuff like that. So that kind of concludes my document, guys. So smash that like. We're going to now just get into a documentary and kind of relax. And I'll probably stop and comment on certain things that reiterate points of today's stream. But, you know, that whole Tang period was really, I find it really interesting. And one of the interesting things that the Tang emperor noted when Nestorian Christianity arrived is that the Christians built their own pagodas. They didn't use slave labor to build their houses of worship. Meanwhile, the Buddhists totally depended on slave labor. And this was noted by the emperor. And this is one of the reasons why they consider Christianity a sort of religion of light. But anyways, I digress there. So if you want access to that full document, that is going to be available at my website for all website members. So just get yourself a $5 membership and you'll be able to access all those documents that I've done from previous streams. You can copy and paste them into your own Word document, and then you can have them as your own notes for topics in the future. So, yeah. Let me just read a few super chats here. So guys, smash that like. Thank you all so much. Again, we got members only content. So if anybody's out there and is feeling generous, please give some COTEL Crew memberships to the chat. More people, the better, that are able to access some of that members only content. I got more coming here on YouTube. So thank you everybody who's already a COTEL Crew member. I do appreciate it. And thank you everybody who's already sent in super chats regarding questions and comments on today's topic. I do appreciate that as well. Please, if you'd like to support my work and research, use Streamlabs or Dono Chat, or if you prefer to use YouTube, feel free to use YouTube. And it looks like somebody sent in Glitchy Rhythm, throws in $10 and says, humbly ask for your prayers. I haven't been to church in a while, partly because I have gotten tangled up with the drinking again. A lot of shame, but I need to stop for my son. Please pray. Thank you, DPH. Well, I will pray, Glitchy Rhythm. If you're able, maybe let us know what your Christian name is, or at least your first name in the chat, so I could at least appeal to God based on your actual name, Glitchy Rhythm. But let me see. Maybe he's already addressed it in the chat. Glitchy Rhythm, can you just state if you feel comfortable, or if you got baptized, just use your Christian name so we can pray for you. But you know, we all fall off the wagon, man. We all get caught up in our own temptations. You're not unique. All of us do this. The only difference, Glitchy Rhythm, is that you just get back up, man. That's what your son would appreciate, is that you don't give up. He's going to understand, especially when he's an adult, that, you know, people fall. We fall into our indulgences here and again, but don't give up, brother. Do not give up. Keep going. Get yourself together. Go back to church, even if you don't feel like it. Just go back to church, and you'll be thankful for it. I promise. So thank you very much, brother, for the support. Really appreciate that. Let me check the Dono chat. Doesn't look like anything's coming on the Dono chat. And then let me see if anybody sent in anything on Streamlabs. So looks like, why don't we just go ahead and get into our documentary today? And I'm going to speed it up again. I can't sit. I've already watched this thing. So going through it again, maybe we'll just watch parts of it. I don't know. Okay, so this is a BBC documentary. It's one of the few documentaries I could find that's not copyrighted and get this stream taken down. So we're going to watch parts of this one on Confucius, and maybe we'll skip the part on his childhood. You guys already get some of that. And we'll just jump straight into this right here.
This collapse in society would become the catalyst for Confucius's groundbreaking philosophy. The oldest record of Confucius' life and ideas, the Analects, were compiled about a century after his death. These fragments of his conversations, along with other later histories, give us clues to his life story. We're told that Confucius was just 3 when his father died. Old aristocracy, he'd fallen on hard times, one of the victims of the turmoil of the age, leaving Confucius's mother to raise her son on her own in a kind of genteel poverty. Interestingly, it seems that education was Confucius's lifeline, somehow, probably through a mix of private teachers and homeschooling, and you suspect the sheer grit and determination of his mother. Confucius was taught history, poetry, and ritual. While other children played with toys, he's said to have acted out sacred rituals by laying out cups and bowls. Now, these weren't just empty gestures, a bit of spiritual theatre. The kinds of rituals that Confucius learned played a crucial role in the ancient Chinese worldview, a worldview in which order and harmony, both on Earth and in the cosmos, were considered essential goals if life on Earth was to continue. The ancient rites that young Confucius knew were performed here at the Temple of Heaven in Beijing right up until the 20th century. The Chinese.
Crispy, do you have a crush on Bethany here? The documentary presenter here on BBC. Sounds like you knew her by name, buddy. You have anything you want to confess to us?
Had a particular religious outlook, which meant that these rituals weren't directed towards a deity.
There is no creator God. There's nothing like the idea of a supreme power that dreams everything into being. What it posits instead is this notion that there are 2 cosmic forces. They're not even really divine. They're just natural forces, a bit like gravity in a sense. And on the temple here, you have perhaps the most common, the most powerful symbols of these 2 great forces. And that is the dragon, the heavenly force, and the phoenix is the female, the cold, the earthly force. And they are locked in perpetual struggle. They try to overcome each other. And it's this incredible dance of power out of which all life pours.
So what's humanity's role in all of this?
We're fundamental to this. You've got these 2 great cosmic forces, and our role is to keep the balance. And we do this through ritual. And that's what this kind of temple complex was built for. This is where the ruler would come to make offerings to rebalance these 2 forces. And it wasn't just for the rulers. It took place in every single temple, every local shrine, right down to the household.
Sounds like a potent and a pervasive worldview that Confucius has been brought up with.
Absolutely, it's the only worldview he knows.
As he reached adulthood, it looks as though Confucius grew to appreciate the gaping disparity between the ancient ideal of order and the reality of life subject to the chaos that raged all around him. His search for a solution to that intractable problem at the very heart of Chinese society would prove to be his life's work. Fortunately, conditions across the ancient world were nourishing new ways of thinking. Improvements in agriculture, increased trade, and growing urbanization meant that some in society were less tied to a life of subsistence, creating the opportunity for men like Socrates, the Buddha, and Confucius to develop their ideas. The scale of change, economic and technological, is reflected in archaeological remains, like this monumental grain store.
Now, this is actually a pretty interesting point here in the documentary, is they highlight that these grain storage, so this huge hole in the ground, this is what allowed for the development of like philosophy in general, is that people, as she highlights, weren't living hand to mouth anymore. And this provided the ability to think, to come up with the Confucius moral social philosophy.
Advances in technology from the Iron Age onwards led to an increase in agricultural yields that were stored in massive pits like this. Suddenly, for ordinary people, because they had enough food, life just wasn't a grinding cycle of a kind of hand-to-mouth existence. Obviously, stores like this provided grain, but they also gave another great gift: time to think. When Confucius was about 20, we're told he landed a bureaucratic job, managing grain stores like this. But his mind was occupied by the turmoil of the day. Looking around him, it seemed obvious to Confucius that humanity needed help, and how he responded is considered a first in Chinese history. He began to engage in systematic philosophical inquiry. One thing I like about Confucius is the sense that you get that he had a kind of natural curiosity, that he felt compelled to explore and to try to understand the world. And in his early 20s, he decided to leave his home state of Lu and get on the road. Travelling west, he would have eventually met the Great Yellow River. I think we had to imagine him at this point in his life as a kind of ethnographer, going from one place to another with open eyes and an open mind, gathering together experiences and encounters. The Analects describe Confucius meeting people who'd renounced civilized society and lived amongst nature. These recluses were the forerunners of Taoism, that other great belief system of ancient China. They believed in something known as the Way. Could you explain to me what exactly the Way is?
So her conversations are not auditorially translated with Chinese people. So we're going to skip this because people are going to be listening to this on a podcast in the future, and I doubt they're going to be able to know what they're saying in Chinese.
As he was studying in the state archives, he met an older man, and they struck up a philosophical discussion. As Confucius got up to leave, the old man chastised him. Put away your proud air and many desires, your insinuating habit and wild will. These are of no advantage to you. The enigmatic old man was none other than Lao Tzu, credited as the founder of Taoism. Whether it's true or not, this pairing with such a great figure reveals the iconic status Confucius would later reach. And it tells us something else. That setting in the archive gives us a clue to Confucius's methods. For him, solutions to contemporary problems lay in a close study of what had gone before. The past was a kind of reservoir of truth. Ever since he was a boy, he'd been schooled in ancient texts. Now, as a man, they became the inspiration for and the very foundation of his philosophy. Recent discoveries have shed new light on these classic texts of Chinese history. 800 bamboo slips, which contain the earliest evidence of Confucius's words.
They were found in 1993 in a tomb of an old nobleman.
Amazing.
Yes.
And they date back to when?
Oh, these were dated to the 4th century BCE, roughly 100 years after Confucius. And it says something like, set your mind on the way and be virtuous. Do everything in accordance with humanity.
Not only the earliest words of Confucius, but beautiful words too. Wow.
And they were so amazing because they provide us new information on early classics that were very important to Confucius himself. And for example, this particular slip mentioned about the classics he would have read. The Book of Odes, Ritual, and Music. But the Book of History is very important because it recorded figures such as the Duke of Zhou and early kings of the Western Zhou that was about 500 years before Confucius' time. And these men were able to lead a society of harmony.
Confucius found in the words of the Book of History what he was looking for. An ideal model where social and political harmony had prevailed, engineered by the almost superhumanly sage rulers of the early Zhou dynasty. In particular, the Duke of Zhou. When his brother, King Wu, died, the Duke could have seized the throne. But it's reported that instead he acted loyally, ruling as a regent for his nephew, the king's son. And then, when the boy grew up, fairly and faithfully, he handed over the reins of power. Whether these accounts were entirely true is a moot point, but Confucius saw huge potential in them.
This golden age was robust evidence that social order was possible. By following the practices and the examples of the early Zhou, by reviving the past, there could be solutions to the problems of the present. It is the great thing about golden ages. They're very comforting. We believe that if humanity was capable of wonderful things in the past, we can achieve them once again.
Confucius believed that early Zhou society was the ideal manifestation of his concept of the way. To recreate that harmony, society needed to return to their high standards, especially in terms of ritual. Confucius was convinced that the ancient rites had been corrupted. In order to restore the Golden Age, he would have to reinstate proper ritual. Here, in Confucius's hometown of Chufu, is a temple dedicated to the master. It's the ultimate place of pilgrimage for many of his devotees. Mr. Kong traces his ancestry back to Confucius and often leads rituals that his illustrious relatives set such store by.
Kong, again, this is the family I mentioned earlier that can trace their lineage. They have an entire, I mean, it looks like a basement warehouse of text tracing them, and everybody's born back to Confucius. Like I said, this is the longest traced trackable family history in the world, is the Kong family after Confucius. And this is one of the, I mentioned him earlier, one of the ritual leaders. I don't know if you'd call him a Confucius priest, but you get the point.
作为孔子后人呢，我们每年呢是有2次非常庄重的来祭祖。在祭孔大典当中呢，我们的每一个步骤都是非常的精准，按照我们。
Confucius was nothing if not a stickler for detail. We hear he wouldn't even sit on a mat unless it was dead straight. But there seems to have been a kind of beauty in his precision. Just listen to these wonderful words describing him. His expression was serious, his step brisk. When with his clasped hands he bowed to his colleagues on left and right, his robes moved evenly in front and back. His hurrying advance was a glide.
Confucius set out to transmit the importance of proper ritual, promoting his ideas right across the land. One account describes his rather hostile reception from a government advisor from the state of Qi. Confucius lays such stress on appearance and costume, elaborate etiquette and codes of behaviour that it would take generations to learn his rule. One lifetime wouldn't be enough. To this day, Confucius is often criticised for his pedantic attachment to intricate forms of antiquated ritual. But what his critics didn't understand is that he discovered something radically new within these ancient rites, something which marked a critical shift in his thinking. When Confucius was in his mid-20s, his mother died. For 3 years, he dutifully carried out ancestral rites in her honor.
Chris, thanks, brother. He says, thanks for DPH for the stream. This was a good one. Glad you liked it. Pick 180 says, quoting the documentary, he wouldn't even sit on a mat unless it was dead straight. He says, Confucius confirmed fellow autist. Thanks, Pick. Really appreciate the laugh.
But he would breathe new life and new meaning into these traditions.
Oh, how beautiful. So these are things that would actually be used in ancestor worship.
Exactly. Ancient Chinese believe that ghosts and spirits continue to exist after the ancestors die. So it's important to offer them food and wine in this kind of vessels, in particular those made of very
And I was able to go to the Beijing, what is it, like the National Museum? And I think they show it in this doc. I watched a few documentaries, so I can't remember what's in this one actually, but it's beautiful. It's astounding. It's as an American, it is mind-numbing to see how old Chinese culture is and the artifacts that they still have, and our country, which isn't even 300 years old yet. I mean, 1776, we still got, another, 50 years before it's 300 years. And so next year will be the 250th year anniversary of the nation. 250 years? 250 years? That is the blink of an eye when you're talking about ancient cultures like China. It's really, really astounding to actually go to some of these museums. And somebody said in the chat, Chinese people don't like foreigners. That's true. That's absolutely true. It's now not all Chinese. I had a great experience in China, but I will say that there were, so it was known, for example, I was in Guangzhou. Are you familiar with China? So let's do Google Maps. I guess it's quicker to go the other way. So it's a very long flight to go over the Pacific, but once you get to China, you look down here. So, Shanghai up north here, Shanghai, here's Taiwan, down in the Guangdong province. And so down here, you're going to find Macau, Hong Kong, and you go over here to Guangzhou. So there's Hong Kong. So Macau's kind of like Las Vegas on steroids. Hong Kong, it was like the British colony until of recent. They gave it back to, they made it, it's kind of independent, although China's taken it over. They pretty much already taken it over. Anyways, Guangzhou here is a major southern city, and it was the first place with like Western medicine, and there's a river that goes into Guangzhou, and it's a major place of manufacturing and trade. And so when I was there at the university, a lot of students, they weren't even there to study Chinese. They were there to work at business. Like I had people in my classes. I was with a cohort from my university. Okay. Everybody there had to get a passing grade for the summer semester to get the credit. So we actually had to go to class. We actually had to take the exams and like learn it. Meanwhile, I had friends that were Saudi and Mexican and, Argentinian, and they were there purely because their families own businesses back home in their countries, and they could get a student visa in China to stay for 6 months because it's hard to get a long lasting visa in China. You have to go through this process. And so they would circumvent the system by getting a student visa. So their parents would hook their child up with a student visa. They'd go to Guangzhou or go to Sun Yat-sen University and Zhongshan Daxue. And then they would go to classes during the day, and then they would go to the market and buy goods en masse, like bulk goods. Could be solar panels or fabrics, or one friend had like his family owned like I think a rug company. And so they would buy fabrics. He would go to the market and test stuff, but it was known. So I was in a very international group of friends while we were there. Do not get in a fight with a Chinese person in a bar. I know this is totally digressed from Confucianism. We'll come back. I promise. But because it was known that you will get beat badly, if not killed, because there are so many people. So you go to a bar, and this happened to one Russian guy. I think I talked about this on a members video. I'm not sure. There was a Russian guy who was at one of the clubs we went to, and these clubs are in an international district. So it's filled with people from all over the world, Russians, Africans, Arabs. And this Russian guy apparently walked in a bar, and he was quite wealthy, and he stepped on the shoe of a Chinese man there. Didn't know who he was, but you can suspect if the Chinese are in these international clubs, they're of like prominent status. They have money. They're there to do business. They're there to meet people and do business deals. And apparently he stepped on this Chinese guy's shoe. The Chinese guy told him to apologize or like rub his shoe or something. The Russian guy totally disrespected him, like said, "You're crazy." And the Russian guy was with like 4 or 5 other guys. Well, the Chinese man left. He got like 15, 20 other Chinese guys, and they waited till this Russian gentleman left the club, and they beat him almost to death. And there's no police that are going to stop it. There's no arrests that are going to be made. And so when we were there as foreign exchange, or not foreign exchange, but foreign students, international students, it was explicitly known, do not start any confrontation with Chinese people because they will come back in numbers and annihilate you. And so I watched 2 fights. One was actually Nigerians and Russians outside of a club. Russians ended up winning that one, but it was pretty wild. And then another one was with this Russian guy and these Chinese guys that jumped him. And then I had a friend, and I believe I talk about this in one of my members videos, so maybe I shouldn't expand on too much, but we'll just say I had a friend who was in our group, and he got confronted by 8 Chinese guys who were wandering our university, which they were not supposed to be there. Turned out their parents worked for the CCP and they were from Beijing. And it was amazing. They had like perfect English. I mean, they were cursing at us in English, but my friend, he was taking his bag to one of the dorms there. And on his way back, they confronted him and asked him, "Where are you from?" And he said, "I'm American." And they began to wail on him and basically jumped him. And me and my roommate at the time had to come down from the hotel, the international hotel we're staying at. And he was in the lobby, literally breaking everything, threatening. And this guy he went to Afghanistan. He was a former soldier. And he was in a state of pure survival. He had his shirt ripped. I could see he was bloody, and he had a pencil or a pen, and he was threatening them. He was behind the front desk of the hotel, threatening them to come across it because he was going to stab them to death. Me and my friend get there. We ended up like literally fighting these guys. And when the police came, there was tons of damage. I mean, my friend who was getting jumped, he broke everything in an attempt to throw it at these people. And at one point he took like an older phone that has the buttons and a long cord, it stretches forever. He unplugged the cord from the phone and threw it like a Frisbee and hit one dude right across the eyebrow and just split it wide open, blood everywhere. He was totally out of commish. And the police come after this fight. This is at like 4 a.m. We had just come back from the clubs, and the group was getting ready to travel to Xi'an. And I was with another friend. We were getting ready to travel to Beijing that night. So we're getting on trains early the next morning. One group's flying, or no, both groups are actually taking trains, which are like 20 hours long. It's like a 22-hour trip from Guangzhou to Beijing, or maybe 18, 20, somewhere between 18 and 22 hours on a train. And the police come, and because these guys and their parents work for the CCP, they weren't allowed to be arrested. And so essentially there was a negotiation where my friend had to pay for, I think, half of the damages. And then the ringleader of this group of Chinese guys had to pay for the other half. So when somebody said the Chinese don't like internationals, it's a different context. Once you're in China, you have to be on your P's, P's and T's, please and thank yous, be on your best behavior, because, bad things may happen. We'll just put it that way. So anyways, I totally digressed. I don't know why I went into that long story, but anyways, let's continue.
Expensive bronze. And everyone will be really engaging in the ritual to continue a kind of relationship they had before.
Do we know what Confucius thought about all of this?
Well, Confucius still believed that ancestors were still a very important part, but he started to shift the emphasis towards the living by saying that it means that it's important for us to develop this kind of reverence and the proper relationship while they're still alive. As he said in the Analects very clearly, that if you don't know how to serve the living, how would you know how to serve the dead?
That's really interesting. He's saying actually focus first on the here and now, on those who are still around you in the day-to-day, before you start to think about those who are long dead.
You were so right. It's no longer just about objects like this. It's about your state of mind, your feelings, your love and sincerity from inside that you would have towards these people around you.
Confucius realized that ritual brought out positive emotions in us. But his really big revelation was that this could permanently change who we are. Habitually performing the rituals of history with the right attitude and sincerity could transform our mindset. Virtuous feelings could make virtuous beings.
Ritual for him
was not just the way you do things exactly follow the traditional and the rules, but even more importantly, and you got to have something inside. You got to have reverence, respect, because this was the way to cultivate your inside goodness, inside these kind of and qualities, and the whole person would be transformed down inside.
I mean, that sounds really radical. So he's saying you need to do things properly, but they're not just a mechanical action. It affects who you are inside, sort of psychologically.
Yes, exactly. Not only just bring order to this social and life, but also this to create a new psychological and this meaning there, and try to cultivate this good human qualities.
Yeah, look, it's interesting because he doesn't say.
So you see, there's like a somatic philosophy here where participating in the rituals with the right intention actually, Confucians believe, transforms the individual themselves. That's why the ritual is so important.
Himself as an innovator, but he was.
Yes, he was. I think Confucius said, he was the only transmitter. They transmitted the old ancient culture to today, to the future. But actually, what he did was innovation. These new things really coming from his reinterpretation of something already exists, such as the ritual.
Nourishing virtue lay at the core of Confucius's vision, and he saw transformative opportunities in everyday rituals, how we speak, how we dress, and how we eat. But one that was particularly close to his heart was music. He's said to have played the zither and the sounding chimes.
This was a time and place where music was all around, played on totally wonderful things like this monumental set of bells that dates to just after Confucius' death. Music was played to accompany ritual in temples and homes. So if you listen to these, then you'll be hearing the sounds that would have surrounded Confucius during his lifetime. Confucius was convinced that music had the power to harmonize, to transform and perfect an individual. Basically, this is art as therapy 2,500 years before we invent the phrase. This practical application of philosophical ideas in day-to-day life is something that really marks out Confucius, as well as those other game-changing philosophers, the Buddha and Socrates. As a philosopher, you don't just indulge in abstract musings, you develop a robust delivery mechanism for your theories. Ideas have to have traction, and they have to have tangible impact.
Confucius was a practical man. He'd been spurred into action by the bellicose times into which he was born. His philosophy would only truly be a success if he could effect change on a grand scale.
Confucius came to think this, that shaping and cultivating moral individuals was the key to creating a stable social and political order. By figuring out what made a good person, you could make a good society. And so his mission was this, to teach people how to be virtuous in a world of political disorder and moral decay.
Confucius had given himself a mountain to climb. How to instill virtue in society when society's moral contract was so broken was Confucius's big challenge. He was to find inspiration from a familiar and enduring institution.
So this goes into the family, and this actually talks about the guy that had a mother with dementia that I mentioned. So now I'm going to fast forward to how Confucius felt about some of the imperial pursuits for like timeless weapons and stuff like this. So here we go.
The waywardness of its rulers.
This magnificent sword embodies what, for Confucius, was the fundamental problem with Chinese leadership.
This was made when Confucius was alive, and it tells us all about itself. There's an inscription here that reads, belonging to King Go Zien of Yue, made for his personal use. Now, this is obviously a fabulously deluxe object, and Confucius wouldn't have had a problem with that per se. He wasn't puritanical. He enjoyed the good things of life, swimming in rivers, singing with friends, and he understood the need for worldly goods. But he did not think that good men should devote their time and energy to the pursuit of personal gain. And he didn't believe in immoderate action, anywhere, anytime, from anyone.
In Confucius's opinion, kings who commissioned swords like this often abandoned virtue if it got in the way of worldly success. He saw the way to transform society was to instill the values at work in the family in the rulers of his day. To understand the power they wielded, you only need to look at the way they were honoured in death. This ruler, from around the time of Confucius, was buried along with 26 expensive chariots and 70 sacrificial horses.
What kind of connection did Confucius see between relationships that he'd observed between father and son in a family and what's going on here?
Well, he looked at the fact that if you had a good father, he could bring up a good son, and a good son could then respect the father, and this could work. So he said, well, look, if it works at this level, let's just take it to the top. If the ruler views those beneath him as his children and treats them with love, but with firmness, with compassion, but with integrity, that it would then kind of roll down through the system. And the Confucianists could say, look, you see how the ruler's living like this, you should live like this. And literally, it would roll down like the clouds from the mountain and bring blessing to everyone.
So for him, might in and of itself wasn't a problem. But if you had might, then you also had to have a kind of philosophical responsibility to your people.
Yes, Confucius continued the Zhou tradition that a ruler has the right to rule because heaven has clearly given them the power and the authority. And that's why the top ruler was called the Son of Heaven. However, that mandate, that right to rule, can be taken away by heaven. And a sign that heaven has taken it away is natural disasters, massive earthquakes, floods. Confucius said, if a ruler becomes corrupt and people are suffering through this cruelty, then the people have the right to rebel. And so Confucius, at one level, tells you respect, honor, duty, loyalty. And he also said, and if that fails, you have the right to overthrow. Amazing trick.
Confucius' tactic was very direct. He set out to influence those in power by getting a governmental post. One snag was his personality. He was often seen as arrogant, too blunt in the way he delivered his advice. But he also faced a bigger problem.
With enemy armies numbering as many as 300,000 camped on their borders, and disloyal sons plotting behind their backs, perhaps it's no surprise that the rulers of the day failed to take Confucius seriously. Cultivating moral character and virtuous actions in such precarious times was just not a priority.
With rejection upon rejection, Confucius's faltering political career looked set to fail, and his ideas in danger of being lost to history. But he was tenacious and resourceful.
In his early 50s, it looks as though he decided to change his strategy. He gathered together a few belongings and hit the road once again to continue his moral crusade. Only this time, he wasn't alone. He was travelling together with a group of devoted students.
So this talks a little bit about him traveling with his students and eventually returning back and gaining, young people as followers. So I'm going to skip that section.
Virtuous character to become the perfect moral person.
You had to know the books of history to live by the example of the sage kings and to enact correct ritual. But what was essential was to be morally alive to your environment, to understand how to behave intuitively in any situation, to think for yourself.
Confucius' students joined their master, moving across war-torn China to try to influence its errant rulers. They were attacked, beaten, and almost starved. But these testing times sharpened their education.
The challenges they faced forced them to engage in urgent moral debate. They proposed solutions to their problems and then interrogated those, provoking the intense intellectual discussions between master and students that you find in the Analects. They asked questions like, should the Junzi accept office in degenerate times? Can you serve a corrupt master if you think you can make a difference?
Confucius encouraged this open-ended, free-thinking discussion. Yet his students still looked to him for definitive answers. Ultimately, they wanted to know what was the essence of goodness. For Confucius, there
Poor wording. They didn't believe in essences, Bethany. And so another conversation is getting ready to occur with a Chinese scholar in Chinese. So we're gonna go to the last section here and then wrap it up. So if you guys have any questions or comments or want to support the stream, my research, my channel, feel free to send a question or comment in real quick, and then we'll wrap things up. So guys, smash that like. Thank you all for everybody who's still here, and we'll end this with this section in the documentary.
This about all three of the philosophers whose stories I'm investigating. They made it clear that none of us operate in isolation. It isn't that man is the measure of all things, but man's relationship with man.
Confucius continued to travel and to teach into his later years, but only a handful of his students went on to hold political office.
When Confucius was 73, he fell ill. Unable to fulfill his mission, his final words seemed defeated and bitterly disappointed. No intelligent monarch arises. There is none who will make me his master. It is my time to die.
Confucius was buried here in his hometown, Chufu. The great transformation he'd worked for his entire life had not been fulfilled. But his devoted students planted trees around his grave and kept his dream alive. For 300 years, Confucius's ideas continued as just one of many Chinese schools of thought. Competing with the likes of Taoism, it was unable to effect real change in a chaotic world. But once China was reunited under all-powerful emperors, stability changed the political landscape. The first emperor of the Han Dynasty was convinced by his principal advisor that ruling by brutality had served his predecessor badly. Allying himself with Confucianism and its ideal of rule by virtue would lend to his dynasty greater legitimacy.
Many of the values that Confucius set great store by, the importance of education, shared cultural heritage, and ethical government, had seemed an irrelevance during the chaos of his lifetime. But these would prove hugely effective in holding the new empire together.
Successive emperors enthusiastically took up Confucian ideas, and education was central. The poetry, arts, and music of the early Zhou were revived as a means of cultivating the goodness and virtue within. School children learned the Confucian canon by heart, meticulously writing it out in their best calligraphy. Knowledge of the books of history and rituals of the Zhou dynasty became a prerequisite to be part of the civil service.
So we're going to wrap it up there. Yeah, somebody noted, no, Confucius was an absolute monarchist. And you could see, though, by these Confucian principles, I would argue, you can see why China, in a way, was a place that communism would, would be appealing to many people, because so many people were in poverty. There is immense class division between the wealthy and the who's and the haves and the have-nots. And then this communal focus, right? And it's all about the collective. It's not about the individual. And so communism kind of provided a framework for a sort of secular reinterpretation of this sort of collective framework that China was built on. And now, as we see, the communism is sort of a hybrid in China. I mean, totalitarian for sure, but it's like a mixture of Western capitalism and sort of dictatorial central command, communist style Marxism. But Confucianism has totally come back into favor and is now being used as a way to revitalize like Chinese identity and Chinese nationalism. And so it's amazing that something like Confucianism and Confucius is still thriving today. If we can compare it to the Western tradition, it's not like Socrates has a devotional cult or a nation state that still utilizes his teachings as part of their sort of collective framework and identity. even Plato or Aristotle, where when we looked at Confucius, they still do. And I think that's worthy of note in regards to history. So anyways, I think that's going to wrap it up, guys. Smash that like. Looks like Jordan Clips just threw Jordan Clips Rising throws in $10. Thank you so much, brother. And he says support. Really appreciate that. God bless you. And Well Emmanuel says thanks. Well, thank you, Well Emmanuel, for being a member for 23 months. And if you're interested, Well Emmanuel, we have a new members only stream available here on YouTube. It's about 3 hours of Orthodox prophecies and eschatology. So if that's what you're interested in, just want to let everybody know. So get yourself a membership, because I'll be posting more members only content here on the YouTube channel. And Jordan Clips throws in another 5, says great stream, DPH. Well, thank you, brother, for the support. Really appreciate that. I know some of these higher, more topically focused streams aren't as popular as some of the other ones, but I appreciate all you guys for being here, especially everybody in the chat. Many of you guys have been here since the opening of stream. Major shout out to Crispy. Shout out to Dr. Crispy Synapse for all his support. He's always helping me out and modding my chat and always has funny comments. And tonight we were made aware of his love for Bethany Hughes. So thank you so much, Crispy. Really appreciate you, brother. God bless you. God bless your family. God bless your four-legged friend, your dog. And shout out to Bill Hicks. I see Bill Hicks in the chat. God bless you, brother. Denise, shout out to you. Shout out to everybody who supported the stream today and sent in super chats. Major thank you to you guys. And next sponsored stream is going to be, thank you, Josh. I'll get back to you on email. The next sponsored stream, somebody has asked for me to do a overview of Jort Eclipse throws in $5, says Jort Apocalypse, but one word. Yeah, Jort Eclipse. Jort Eclipse Rising, right? Am I not saying that right? Am I off here? Jort Eclipse Rising. Thank you so much, brother, again for your support. Really appreciate that. About halfway to my goal just through your super chats, man. Really appreciate your support. What was I getting ready to say? Oh, the next super chat is a historical overview of the city of London, which I have never dove into the history of the city of London. So that's going to be a bit of a new and interesting little deep dive for myself. So I plan on doing another stream this week and maybe a news stream. I know that was very popular. Bill Hicks says you're saying it right. He's hearing you wrong. Thanks. Oh, Jordacopolis. I see. I was wrong. My bad. Jordacopolis. So Jordacopolis. My bad. Jordacopolis Rising. Apologize. Yeah, I see everybody helping me out now in the Thank you, Jordacopolis. Note taken. Bill Hicks. Yeah. So, anyways, next stream is going to be our sponsored stream, at least, is going to be an overview of the history of the city of London. I haven't dove too deeply into that. That should be a fun one, and I plan to. Jordacopolis Rising throws in another $10, says, just take the money. Thank you, Jordacopolis Rising, for the support. Do appreciate it. Thank you very much, my man. I apologize for butchering the name. I don't know why it wasn't coming out right. It sounded right to me, or at least I thought I was pronouncing it right. But upon your further correction, I do stand corrected. So thank you, Jordacopolis, for the support tonight. Really appreciate that. And thank you, everybody. Let me just double check before we hop off here. Like I said, I'm going to do another stream this week. I may do some news since there's a lot of interesting things in the works regarding America, world politics, geopolitics, all types of stuff. So If not, I'll come up with something. So I'm planning to do the London stream Sunday or Monday, and that gives me a couple days to sort of dive in and get my my head around the topic. So Jordan Kappa lips. Anyways, thank you guys. Really appreciate it. And I will see. And then again, another major thank you to Brendan for sponsoring today's stream. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you, everybody, for the support. And I will see you in the next one. As always, until next time, God bless. Jordacalypse. I got it, brother. Jordacalypse. See you guys.